March 3rd. I don't know why I'm writing this down. There's no one to read it. Maybe that's exactly why. I've got 2 journals left. Found them in a plastic tub I packed 7 years ago. A 12-pack of composition notebooks, the standard black and white kind, still sealed in their original plastic. I remember buying them at Walmart on a Tuesday afternoon while my neighbor was in the checkout line behind me. She watched me put 12 notebooks in the cart and didn't say anything, but I saw her face. That specific look, the one that says something about you without the person having to open their mouth. I was used to that look by then. The plan was to write everything down: daily logs, system checks, what I ate, what broke, what I fixed, what the air readings said, how the water tasted, practical stuff, engineering notes essentially. I had this idea that if something went wrong underground, I'd have a written record of what changed and when. You'd be surprised how useful that is when you're troubleshooting. A piece of equipment behaves oddly on a Tuesday, and you go back through your log and realize it's been making a noise differently since last Thursday, and that's your first clue. Paper memory is more reliable than head memory, especially when you're stressed. But I never actually used them for that. For the first 4 months underground, I was too busy doing to write anything. Then I found 2 empty ones at the bottom of the tub yesterday, and I figured, okay, now. So I'm writing this mostly for myself, to keep the sequence straight in my own head, and partly because the silence down here has started to weigh on me in a way I wasn't expecting, and writing feels like a way of pushing back against it, like it's proof that a person is here, that the lights are on somewhere, even if nobody can see them from outside. Let me start from the beginning. The real beginning, not the outbreak. The outbreak is just the day everything I did started to make sense. I'm going to call myself Owen in these pages, because even talking to yourself in the third person is strange, and I need some kind of distance from this. Owen Rafferty, 44 years old as of last October, though I missed my birthday underground, which is a strange thing to realize after the fact. Former structural engineer, 12 years at Hardin-Kelso Associates in Indianapolis, then 6 years freelance. No kids, divorced since 2019. One brother in Phoenix who I stopped talking to regularly around 2021, because every conversation ended the same way, and eventually you get tired of hearing yourself through someone else's frustration. I built the bunker. That's the sentence I keep turning over. Such a simple string of words, and yet it sounds insane every time I hear it in my own head. I built the bunker. I spent 8 years building a bunker in the ground under 20 acres of rural Indiana property I bought specifically for that purpose. And I did it while holding down a job and telling almost nobody. And now it is the only reason I am alive, and everyone who looked at me like that woman in the Walmart checkout line is almost certainly dead. I'm not writing that to sound good. I'm writing it because it's the truth, and the truth is strange. And I've been living alone with it for 4 months, and I need to say it out loud in some form. Here's how it started. The year was 2016. Not special, globally speaking. Well, special in its own ways, but not for the reason I'm about to tell you. I was working on a bridge reinforcement project for the state, which meant I was spending a lot of time reading structural failure reports, collapse analyses. You study what went wrong in bridges that fell. You learn what not to do. Standard stuff in my field. But somewhere in that reading, and I genuinely couldn't tell you which report cracked the door open, I fell down a rabbit hole into disaster preparedness literature. Not the survivalist on YouTube kind. The actual academic and government emergency planning kind. FEMA scenario documents. CDC pandemic projections. Department of Defense long-range threat assessments. The boring stuff that nobody reads because it's formatted like insurance policy fine print, and about as exciting. I read all of it. And here's the thing about reading that kind of material as a structural engineer: you stop seeing the scenarios as hypothetical, and you start seeing them as engineering problems. A city loses water infrastructure after a major earthquake. A pandemic overwhelms hospital systems. A cascading supply chain failure hits a region that's 80% dependent on just-in-time delivery. These aren't political arguments. They're load-bearing calculations. You put too much stress on a system that wasn't designed for it. The system fails. That's not doomsaying. That's physics. What I noticed, looking at all of it together, was that most disaster planning assumed recovery would follow collapse. As in, something goes bad, the systems wobble, then outside help arrives and things stabilize. The assumption of recovery was baked into almost everything. And I kept thinking, what if the outside help is also collapsed? What if the thing that goes wrong is big enough that the cavalry isn't coming? Because the cavalry is dealing with the same thing somewhere else. I didn't think about zombies. I want to be clear about that. In 2016, I was not thinking about reanimated corpses. I was thinking about what would happen if a pandemic killed 40% of the American workforce simultaneously, or if a series of infrastructure attacks hit water treatment, power grids, and food distribution all within the same month, or if a natural disaster hit the wrong geographic region at the wrong time of year, and the domino chain couldn't be stopped. The answer, when I modeled it out, and I did actually model it out, in a spreadsheet, with probability weights and cascade timelines, the answer was, most people would be dead within a year. Not because of the initial event, but because of everything the initial event disrupted. Water first, then sanitation, then food, then medical care, then the social fabric that holds everything else together. I showed that spreadsheet to my wife. Her name was Janet. She taught high school chemistry, and she was smarter than me in a lot of ways. But this was not a conversation she wanted to have. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at my projection cells, and then looked at me. And she said, very calmly, "Owen, you need to talk to someone." She meant a therapist. I did talk to someone, actually. A therapist named Dr. Fulton, who I saw for 6 months, and who was helpful in the sense of teaching me to put my anxiety somewhere that wasn't pointed directly at my wife every Tuesday evening. But I didn't stop believing in the spreadsheet. You can be anxious and also correct. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. The bunker started as a thought experiment. What would you need to survive a complete systemic collapse for, say, 2 years? Long enough for the immediate chaos to burn itself out, and for some kind of order to begin reassembling. 2 years felt like the window, long enough for most of the opportunistic violence to have sorted itself out, long enough for some form of organized survival structure to have emerged somewhere, long enough for a person to emerge from hiding without immediately getting killed by someone else who's starving. I wrote up a list, started small. Then the list got longer. Then I started pricing things. Because that's what engineers do. We price things out, because abstract planning is fine, but you have to know what load the budget can actually carry. And the number wasn't as insane as I'd expected. Not for one person, built gradually over time. The property was the big purchase. 20 acres in Bartholomew County. Farmland, flat, cheap by comparison to the Indianapolis suburbs I was already living in. I told Janet it was an investment, a plot of land. We'd maybe build a cabin out there someday, have somewhere to go on weekends. She seemed mildly interested. We went out there once, in the fall of 2016. She walked around in rubber boots and said it smelled like manure and asked if I was going through something. "I'm not going through anything," I said. She looked at the flat dirt and the line of trees at the far edge of the property and said, "Okay." That was probably the beginning of the end, if I'm honest with myself. I started digging in 2017. Not literally. I hired an excavation company under a business LLC I'd set up, told them I was building a root cellar and stormwater management system, which I was. It just happened to be a very large root cellar and a very comprehensive stormwater management system. The excavator was a guy named Terry who had a company called Midwest Ground Solutions and who never once questioned anything I told him, which is either a professional virtue or a personal limitation, and I was grateful for it either way. The first winter I poured footings. The second spring, I started on the walls. I was doing most of the structural work myself on weekends, taking time off during slow periods at Hardin Kelso, driving the hour 40 out to the property on Friday evenings, and coming back Sunday nights, covered in concrete dust, and so tired, I could barely hold a fork at dinner. Janet noticed. Of course she noticed. She asked once, this was maybe 2018, what exactly was out there. We were in the kitchen. I'd been gone 2 weekends in a row, and I'd come back the second Sunday with a cut on my hand that needed 3 stitches at urgent care, and a look on my face that she said, later, scared her. I told her I was building a shelter. An emergency shelter. She asked me to say more. I said it was basically a fortified basement, underground, with enough storage to keep us alive for a couple years if everything fell apart. She was quiet for a long time. If everything fell apart, she repeated. Yeah. Owen. I know what it sounds like. I don't think you do. We had that conversation several more times over the next year, in different forms, and none of them ended the way I wanted them to. Janet was not an unreasonable person. She was a rational person, and from a rational person's perspective, her husband was spending their savings and every free weekend on a hole in the ground in the Indiana countryside because he was afraid that civilization was going to collapse. She went to therapy herself during this period. I know, because I found the appointment cards. I don't begrudge her that. The divorce was finalized in 2019. She got the house, I got the property. That was more or less the agreement. And in retrospect, it made practical sense on both sides, though neither of us framed it that way at the time. My brother called me after the papers were signed. His name is Greg, and he lives in Phoenix with his second wife and their kids. And he's one of those people who's exactly confident enough to say the things that other people are only thinking. He called and he said, "Owen, I love you, but you destroyed your marriage over a bunker." I didn't say anything to that, because it was technically true. "You need to let this go," he said. "You're not crazy, you've gotten stuck somewhere, and you need to get unstuck." I said I'd think about it. I did not get unstuck. What I did instead was keep building. I had more time now, more money in a certain sense because I wasn't splitting anything, and more freedom to just be exactly who I was without having to manage how that looked to someone else. There's a strange relief in divorce that nobody talks about. Not the grief, which is real and which I did feel, but the relief of being able to stop performing, of being able to drive out to a field in Indiana on a Friday night and dig without explaining why. I finished the main chamber in 2019. It was about 1,200 square feet of livable space, which sounds like a lot until you're actually underground, with no windows, and realize that 1,200 square feet feels like the inside of a submarine. I designed it in 3 sections. The main living area with a collapsible table, 4 bunk berths, kitchen setup and food storage along the south wall, a separate mechanical room that held the generator, the water filtration system, the HVAC unit, and the electrical panels, and a third room I called the operations room, which had the radio equipment, a small workbench, and the wall-mounted ventilation controls. The entrance was a ramp, 8 feet underground at the deepest point, through a door that looked, from the outside, like the entrance to a livestock building. I'd framed a small barn structure over it, the kind that's on farm properties all over Indiana, so unremarkable, it wouldn't even register from the road. The actual entrance hatch was a 3-inch steel door with a lever bar lock system that I'd designed myself. It opened from both sides, but could be dead-bolted from inside with 4 independent bolts. The ventilation system took me a full extra year to get right. You cannot live underground without air, and the air solution has to be both passive and active depending on conditions. I ran 2 intake pipes to the surface, each one hidden inside what looked like fence posts at the north end of the property. The intakes had HEPA filter stages and charcoal filtration, and the active blower was a low-draw unit that ran off the electrical system. The exhaust went through a similar system at the opposite end of the property. When everything was working, the air inside the bunker smelled like nothing, absolutely nothing, and that turned out to be one of the more disorienting things about living here. You don't realize how much of the natural world you process through your nose until you're somewhere the nose has nothing to do. The generator ran on diesel. I had 2 600-gallon tanks sunk into the ground 40 feet from the main structure, with a buried line running through conduit. I filled those tanks over several trips, buying from different fuel suppliers each time, paying cash when I could. That probably put me on some kind of list somewhere. I've thought about that. I genuinely don't know. The solar array was the last thing I installed. Summer of 2021. 4 panels mounted at ground level, angled to look like a small agricultural setup. Farmers use them all the time for remote well pumps and outbuilding power. They fed into a battery bank in the mechanical room that could run the basic systems: lights, filtration, refrigeration, for about 4 days without any generator use. The diesel was backup, the solar was primary. 16,000 cans of food, 48 cases of bottled water as immediate reserve, plus the filtration system, drawing from a well I'd drilled. 120 pounds of rice in sealed 5-gallon buckets, 80 pounds of dried beans, 40 pounds of oats, enough multivitamins to last one person 4 years, 2 full medical kits, the real ones, with suture sets and a blood pressure cuff, and actual prescription-strength antibiotics I'd accumulated slowly over years from doctors who didn't push back too hard. 300 rounds for the 12-gauge, 200 for the 357, and a compound bow with 50 arrows because firearms make noise, and I was already thinking about that problem in 2019. Seeds, bags of them, stored in a dedicated airtight chest with a desiccant system, because seeds are the long game. If I ever got to a point where I could grow food, even in containers, even in a small way, I wanted to have that option. Books. 214 physical books, because books don't need electricity, and they don't need Wi-Fi, and they are essentially immune to collapse. Medical references, engineering manuals, a complete set of Foxfire books on Appalachian self-sufficiency, an absurd number of novels I'd been meaning to read for years, and 3 different large-format world maps that I'd laminated. I kept all of this secret. Not from everyone. I told one person, my friend Phil, who I'd known since we were in structural engineering graduate school together. Phil lived in Columbus, about 20 miles from the property, and he was one of those people who thought I was probably slightly nuts, but found the project interesting enough to help me with occasionally. He drove out twice to help me run electrical conduit. He never said I was wrong to build it. He also never said he believed me. He was just there, which is its own thing, and I valued it more than I let on. My colleagues at work thought the weekend absences were about a girlfriend. I let them think that. It was easier. My therapist, a different one by this point, Dr. Alvarez, knew about the bunker in the vague sense that I had a preparedness project, which is how I described it. She was supportive of the concept of having productive outlets for anxiety. I did not tell her the project involved a diesel generator and 16,000 cans of food. Some omissions are kindnesses. By 2022, I was mostly done with the physical structure. I spent that year on the systems, testing the air, testing the water filtration output, cycling through the generator routines, checking the battery bank charge and discharge curves, running everything like an actual facility instead of a concept. In engineering, you don't know if something works until it's under load. So I started doing trial runs, week-long stays underground, then 2 weeks. Then, in the fall of 2022, a full month. That month was hard. I want to be honest about that. I designed the space well, structurally, but I hadn't designed for the psychological weight of it. The ceiling was 8 feet, which is actually better than a lot of underground construction, but after 2 weeks, it started to feel lower. Not literally. I'm not describing hallucinations. I'm describing the way the brain begins to compress space when there's no contrast, no sky, no variation in light. The LED panels I'd installed were good, and I had them on a timer to mimic a day/night cycle. But a lit LED panel and a morning sky are not the same sensory experience, and your body knows the difference. I started doing laps, 20 feet end to end in the main room, back and forth, 100 times an hour. I started talking to myself, which I'd never done before. I started counting things, ceiling tiles, rivet heads on the food shelving, the number of steps between my bunk and the kitchen setup. I came out of that month trial thinner than I'd gone in, not from food scarcity, I'd eaten fine, but from stress. And I made modifications, added more reading light to the bunk area, put a small whiteboard on the main wall for writing and drawing, installed a pull-up bar in the mechanical room doorway, because physical exhaustion is one of the better treatments for the kind of mental tension that builds underground. Got a better clock, a proper analog one with a loud tick, because the sound of a clock turned out to be important. Some kind of evidence that time was moving. I went back in for another month in spring 2023. Better. Still hard, but better. I knew what to expect now, and expectation is most of the battle. June 2023. Everything was ready. I was ready, or as ready as a person can be for something they hope will never happen. I drove home to Indianapolis on a Sunday afternoon, ate a burger at a diner near the interstate, and sat in the parking lot afterward thinking about whether I was insane. The answer I came to, sitting in that parking lot with a half-eaten order of fries getting cold, was probably not. Probably I had spent 8 years building something that I would never need. Probably I would be the guy who builds a bunker for the apocalypse and then dies of something ordinary, heart disease or a car accident, or just old age in an apartment somewhere, and the bunker would sit empty under that Indiana field until the structure finally gave out, and nobody would ever know it was there. That would be fine, I decided. Actually, that would be great. I would love that outcome. I drove home. October 14th, 2023. I remember the exact date, because I'd had a job interview that morning. I was freelancing by then, had been for 6 years, and I was considering taking a permanent position at a firm in Carmel that did a lot of commercial construction. I'd driven up there, done the interview, came back downtown for lunch. I remember I ordered a sandwich from a place on Mass Ave and sat at the counter by the window. And the woman next to me was watching something on her phone with the sound off, and I glanced over and saw the graphic on the screen. It looked like a news headline. At that distance, I could only read part of it. Something about quarantine and nationwide. I didn't think anything of it, not immediately. I went home. I turned on the TV, which I rarely did, and saw what was actually happening. The word they kept using in those first few hours was aggressive pathogen. They didn't say what kind. They showed footage from 3 cities simultaneously: Seattle, Atlanta, and somewhere in Ohio I couldn't identify. And in all 3 the same thing was happening. People were in the streets. Not in the way people are in the streets during a normal emergency. Orderly chaos. Everyone trying to get somewhere. This was different. Some people were running. Some people were on the ground. Some people were moving in a way that didn't look right. In that fundamental visual register, where your brain knows something is wrong before you've processed what it is. I stood in front of my TV for 22 minutes. I checked 3 different news channels, 2 international news sites, and a government emergency management site that had already been updated twice in the last hour. Then I went to my bedroom, opened the closet, and started pulling out the bag I'd had packed since 2021. This is the part that's hard to explain. Not that I moved fast. Moving fast made sense. The news was clearly bad and getting worse. What's hard to explain is the specific feeling, not triumph. I need to say that clearly. Nothing about it felt like vindication or relief, or I told you so. What it felt like was dread. Pure, flat dread. The kind you feel when something you've been worried about for years actually materializes. Because all those years I'd been carrying 2 conflicting hopes. That I was right to prepare, and that I was wrong about what I was preparing for. And for 8 years the second hope had won every day, and now it wasn't winning anymore. I called Phil. He answered on the 4th ring. "You seeing this?" I said. "Yeah. Are you?" "I'm packing," he said. "I'm coming. Be careful on the roads. Don't stop for—" "I know," he said. He didn't make it. I'll get to that. I threw my bag in the truck. I had a separate list taped inside the garage door, laminated. Things to grab that couldn't be stored long-term. Medication, fresh produce, items from the freezer that could ride in a cooler, the loaded pistol from the safe, the shotgun from the gun closet. I went through the list methodically. I was crying while I did it, not sobbing, just a steady leaking from the eyes that I didn't notice until I saw myself in the bathroom mirror while getting the medication. I loaded the truck in 35 minutes, drove out to the property in 1 hour and 22 minutes, at speeds I probably should not admit to, on roads that were already, even at 4 in the afternoon, starting to feel wrong. Traffic going the wrong direction. A car stopped half on the shoulder with the door hanging open. Smoke from somewhere to the east, too dark and thick to be a controlled burn. I got to the property, got through the gate, combination padlock, 4-digit code I'd had since 2018, drove the truck around the back of the barn structure, dragged my gear down the ramp, bolted the hatch. That was October 14th, 2023, at 6:47 in the evening. That was 5 months ago. The first 3 days underground were the worst days of my entire life, and not for the reasons you might think. The structure was fine. The systems were fine. Air was fine. Water was fine. Generator was running quiet and smooth. Everything I'd built worked. What was not fine was not knowing. I had a radio setup, shortwave receiver, a police scanner that pulled emergency frequencies, and an old AM/FM tuner. For the first 3 days I stayed glued to all of it, scanning constantly, logging what I heard, trying to piece together a picture from fragments. Emergency broadcasts from FEMA were looping the same message every 15 minutes. Stay inside, avoid contact, await further instruction. AM radio had 2 stations still broadcasting news, and they were contradicting each other on details that seemed like they shouldn't be contradictory, which told me the people doing the broadcasting didn't actually know what was happening either. What I could piece together, by the end of day 3, the outbreak had started in at least 4 cities simultaneously: Seattle, Atlanta, Dallas, and somewhere in New Jersey. Sources conflicted on the Jersey one. Some said Newark, some said somewhere in Morris County. The first cases had been reported 4 days before my initial news sighting, which meant I'd missed 4 days of runway. The pathogen was not airborne. This point was emphasized in every broadcast, but transmission was through bites and, they thought, blood contact. The infected were not behaving like healthy humans. This was stated clinically on the FEMA broadcast and hysterically on the surviving AM stations, but the basic fact was the same across all of them. The infected were not responsive to pain, were not responding to verbal commands, were moving towards sound and movement with what seemed like single-minded focus. By day 4, the FEMA broadcast had stopped being updated. It was still playing, but it was looping a message from 3 days prior. The last update they'd sent had said, "All resources are being directed toward containment." After that, nothing new. The AM stations ran until day 6. One of them, a station out of Indianapolis, went off-air mid-sentence on day 5. The announcer had been talking about evacuation routes north of the city. Stopped speaking. Static. I stayed on that frequency for 4 hours hoping it would come back. It didn't. The second AM station, somewhere out of a smaller city south of me, kept going until day 7. When it finally stopped, the last thing they broadcast was a 20-minute loop of an older man reading names. Names of people. Just names and a location, over and over. I think he was trying to help families find each other. It was methodical, almost formal. He'd read a first name, a last name, a street address, pause, then the next one. He did this for 20 minutes, and then the signal dropped, and I never heard his voice again. That was the last coherent broadcast I received in the first month. After that, it was fragments. Military frequencies with coded traffic I couldn't fully decode. A radio ham in what sounded like Tennessee, who broadcast daily at noon for about 3 weeks, before his signal disappeared. A Spanish-language station out of what sounded like Mexico that was still operating, broadcasting news in a calm, professional voice that made me think of a different world, one where maybe things were holding together, at least partially. I listened to that station for hours even though I only understand about 40% of Spanish, and the familiarity of a human voice reading news in a formal tone, even a language I could only follow partially, was something I needed in a way that surprised me. Phil called me on day 5. His number came through on the 2-way radio setup, not the cell phone. Cell service was spotty from the first day and gone by day 3. But Phil had a matching radio from the set I'd given him 2 years ago, when I'd given each of his kids a laminated card with the property coordinates and frequencies written on it. His wife had thought it was morbid. I didn't blame her. His voice was tight, controlled but tight. "I'm stuck," he said. I think I'm about 40 miles out. The roads are, Owen. The roads are not passable." "Where exactly?" He gave me a road intersection. I pulled out my Indiana road map, the big laminated one, and found it. He was between 2 small towns, on a county road. "Are you in the vehicle?" "Yeah, it's not going anywhere though. There was an accident ahead of me and I went around it into a field and I'm stuck in a ditch. I got out and walked a bit and..." He stopped. When he started again, his voice had changed slightly. "Owen, they're everywhere out there. I turned around and came back to the truck. I thought about what I could do. I thought about driving out to get him. I thought about it very seriously. It was 40 miles, and the roads were bad, and there was no way to know what was between me and him. More importantly, the bunker was the only thing protecting either of us. If I left it and something happened on the road, I lost everything. "Phil," I said, "listen to me. Can you get out of the vehicle and move overland, through fields, away from the roads?" "It's October," he said. "It's dark. I know. I don't have—" He paused. "I've got a flashlight and my hunting rifle in the back seat." "Move overland," I said. "Northeast. Don't use lights unless you absolutely have to. The properties out here are mostly flat. Fence lines run east-west. Navigate by fences. I'll stay on this frequency." He was quiet. "Phil?" "Yeah," he said. "Okay. Yeah, let me—" I heard him moving around in the truck, heard the thunk of the rifle being unzipped from a case. "Okay, I'm moving." I stayed on the radio for 11 hours. He checked in at the 3-hour mark. Said he'd covered maybe 4 miles, heard sounds in the dark that he couldn't identify, and had moved around them. His flashlight was dimming. He checked in at the 6-hour mark. His voice was different, slower, like the adrenaline had burned through and left nothing behind it. He said he thought he could see the highway from where he was. That was the last transmission. I called his frequency for 2 days after that. Then one more time on day 10. Nothing. I still call it on the 15th of every month. Still nothing. I'm writing this in March, so I've done it 5 times now. The silence at the end of each call is the same silence as the first time, and I haven't figured out how to make it feel different. All right, stop. I need to write about the practical stuff, not just the emotional archaeology. The emotional archaeology is for late nights when I can't sleep. The practical stuff is what kept me alive. So let me be methodical. Month 1. Systems management. The generator burned through my expectations faster than my estimates. I'd calculated on average load, but I was running the radio constantly those first weeks, which I hadn't fully factored in, and I was also running the lights longer than planned, because the dark was bad for my head. By the end of week 3, I was already behind on my fuel projections. I switched to primarily solar during daylight hours, hard limit on generator use, 4 hours a day maximum during highest demand periods. This meant some compromises. Refrigeration running at minimum, radio on a scheduled basis instead of constant monitoring, lighting reduced to essential areas. The refrigerator I had was a small chest freezer converted to fridge mode. Compact, efficient, good seal. It was holding 2 weeks' worth of the perishables I'd brought down with me. Fresh vegetables, 2 dozen eggs, about 6 pounds of deli meat and cheese. I rationed those carefully over the first 10 days. Then they were gone and I switched entirely to shelf-stable food. My daily diet underground became oats in the morning with powdered milk and a spoonful of honey. Canned food at midday, rotating through the inventory so I wasn't eating the same thing every day. Which sounds like a luxury concern, but I'd read enough accounts of long-term underground habitation to know that food monotony is a genuine morale killer. Evening was usually rice or beans or canned soup, sometimes a combination of rice and canned beans cooked in one pot with whatever spicing I had on hand. I had enough spice to make things interesting for about a year. 2 full toolbox-style organizers filled with small containers of dry spice. Cumin, garlic powder, paprika, dried oregano, chili powder, black pepper, cinnamon. That was my idea. I'd read somewhere that prisoners in extended solitary confinement named food flavor, along with light variation, as one of the 2 most important factors in maintaining mental stability. I took that seriously. I also had coffee. I need to tell you about the coffee because it became, I am not exaggerating, the centerpiece of my day. I had 40 pounds of whole bean coffee, vacuum sealed in 1-pound bags, and a hand grinder and a pour-over setup, and every morning from day 1, I made exactly 1 cup of coffee the right way, grinding the beans, heating the water to the right temperature, pouring slowly. The smell alone, and I realize I said smell is dominant in this narrative, but I want you to understand what coffee smells like underground. There is nothing up here to compete with it. The air is filtered and neutral, and has no smell at all, and then you crack a bag of whole beans, and the smell hits you like walking face first into something warm. Every single morning, like proof that the world still has good things in it. I started to look forward to coffee with a ferocity that was slightly embarrassing. Water was good. The well was performing exactly as designed. The hand pump in the mechanical room worked. The filtration output was clean by every test I ran, and I had the emergency bottled reserve as a secondary. I tracked water consumption daily. 1 gallon per day for drinking and cooking. Additional for hygiene, kept to 3 times weekly, which, look, underground hygiene is a different calculation than surface hygiene. You aren't getting dirty in the same ways. You don't need to shower daily. You need to stay clean enough to prevent skin problems and maintain some basic sense of normalcy. The smell of yourself underground is something to manage. Without airflow variation, without outdoor air to disperse things, body odor concentrates faster than it does in a normal living environment. I had baking soda and unscented soap and a sponge bath routine that became as automatic as brushing teeth. It was fine, just different. Exercise, every day, no exceptions. I had the pull-up bar in the mechanical room doorway, a set of resistance bands, and the floor for push-ups, squats, and ab work. 1 hour minimum, broken into 2 half-hour sessions. Not for fitness in any aspirational sense, just to make my body tired enough that sleep came reliably, because sleep was not reliable on its own. Sleep underground is its own puzzle. The body runs on light and dark signals, and even with my LED system on a 1410 cycle, something in the signal isn't quite right. It's too consistent. Natural light changes quality and angle all day. My LED panels just go from off to on and back. After the first couple of weeks, I started getting what I can only describe as a blurred quality to my days. Not confusion exactly, but a loss of the sharpness that a normal morning has when you see actual dawn light. Things started running together. I handled this by creating micro-rituals. Not just the coffee. Everything. A specific sequence to every morning. A specific time for radio check. A specific time for system readings. A specific time for food prep. The more I scheduled, the more the days had shape. And shape was the thing I needed most. Month 1. I also started something I hadn't planned. A verbal log. Every evening before bed, I talked to myself for 15 to 30 minutes. Just narrated the day. What I'd done, what I'd heard, what I'd thought about. It started as a practical way to organize my thoughts, and turned into something I needed emotionally. My own voice in the darkness. Some nights I ran through the math of the supplies out loud, just to have something concrete to say. Some nights I talked about Phil. Some nights I talked about Janet. What she might be doing. Where she might be. I hadn't let myself think too hard about that in the early days, because the possibilities were not good, and I couldn't afford to go down that path when I was still in the acute phase of just surviving the first month. But by the end of month 1, the acute phase was done. Everything was stable. The systems were running. I had food, water, air, power. I was physically okay. And the weight of all the people I didn't know the status of, Phil, Janet, my brother Greg, my old colleagues, anyone I'd ever known, that weight had nowhere to go except down into me. Month 2 was the hardest month psychologically. I'm going to be direct about this, because it matters. If you're reading this, and I've started writing it in a way that imagines a reader, even though I know there probably isn't one, because imagining a reader makes me write more honestly. I want you to understand that what I went through in month 2 was not a breakdown. I never stopped functioning. But it was as close to coming apart as I've gotten, and the gap between functioning and coming apart was thinner than I'd like to admit. It started with a dream. I dreamed I was back in my old house in Indianapolis, in the kitchen, and Janet was at the counter making coffee, and the TV was on in the living room, and everything was completely normal. The specific quality of morning light in that kitchen, it had a window that faced east, and you got this low yellow light across the counter for about an hour in the morning, was perfect. Exactly right. I could smell the coffee and hear the TV, and I stood in the doorway watching Janet and thinking, with total certainty, that nothing was wrong. I woke up to the generator's low hum and the smell of recycled air, and the knowledge that the dream was over, and I lay in my bunk for 2 hours before I could get up. The dreams kept coming. Not always that dream. Different scenarios, different people. Sometimes Phil, sometimes my parents who are both gone now, sometimes colleagues, sometimes strangers. But they all had that same quality of normalcy that had become underground, an almost physical ache, the ordinary world. Stuff that would have been background noise before. The sound of traffic, birds, rain on a window, the particular smell of a grocery store in the morning when they're stocking shelves and the produce section is wet. These were the things I missed in a way that surprised me. Not the big things, the texture of normal life. I managed this by staying busy. I went through the entire food inventory and reorganized it. I not only reorganized it, I cataloged every item individually, created a new tracking sheet, calculated consumption projections under 3 different scenarios, 1 person, 2 persons, 3 persons, and then revised the projections based on updated activity levels. I checked every junction in the electrical system. I tested the water filtration output 3 times in a single week. I read 4 books. I reread one of the Foxfire books cover to cover and took notes on the parts I might eventually need. I was running from my own head and I knew it, and running still works even when you know that's what you're doing. Month 2 is also when I started trying to understand the radio more systematically. The shortwave had become the most important piece of equipment I owned. Not the generator, not the filtration, the radio. Because information was the thing I couldn't produce myself. I knew how to keep the bunker running. What I needed to know was what was happening out there. What I built up over those weeks was a rough picture, assembled from fragments. Government communication hadn't completely collapsed. It had centralized. I could occasionally catch military and federal agency traffic on certain frequencies, and while most of it was coded, some wasn't. Emergency management terminology, logistics language, geographic references. What I could piece together was that federal government continuity operations were running from somewhere in the Mountain West, Colorado possibly. There were references to altitude and to underground facilities that made me think Cheyenne Mountain or something near it. The military was still operating, but in a very different configuration than before. References to consolidated zones, rather than the full national infrastructure. Consolidated zones meant, as far as I could interpret, that there were areas of the country where some kind of military-supported order still existed, not cities. Cities were gone, based on everything I heard, but installations, bases, perhaps some larger fortified communities. The picture was very incomplete. I was listening from underground in rural Indiana with a 3/4 wave antenna, and what reached me was a fraction of what was being transmitted. International shortwave was more accessible. BBC World Service was still broadcasting from somewhere. I got a clear signal twice, both times in the early morning hours. What they described was consistent with what I'd assembled from American sources. A global outbreak, not just American cities. The BBC broadcast was careful and formal in that British way, using words like significant disruption and altered threat environment that were obviously trying to manage panic while acknowledging catastrophe. Between the lines of their careful language, what I heard was, the world as it had existed was gone, or going, and what was coming next was unknown. I thought about that for a long time. The world as it had existed was gone. I'd spent 8 years preparing for that possibility, and now it was a fact, and the fact didn't feel like I'd always imagined it would. I'd imagined something more defined, a clear before and after. Instead, it was a slow sinking, like watching something you love disappear into fog. You keep waiting for the moment when it's fully gone, and the fog just keeps thickening, and you never get a clear last look. I started sleeping better in month 3. I don't know exactly why. Maybe the acute grief phase had run its course, and something more durable had settled in. Maybe the routine had finally taken hold at a deep enough level that my body accepted it. Whatever the reason, I started getting 6 to 7 hours of real sleep, and the quality of my days improved dramatically. Month 3 is also when I noticed the sound. I need to tell you about the sound, because it's the thing that most changed how I understood what I was living in. On the 68th day underground, I know this because I was keeping a specific day count, I was in the operations room doing my midday radio check when I heard something through the intake pipe. The intake pipes have a slight resonance when air moves through them. You can hear outdoor sound faintly if it's loud enough. Usually it was nothing. Wind. Occasionally what might have been distant vehicle sounds in the first weeks, then nothing at all. On day 68, I heard what sounded like a very large number of people walking. That's the only way I can describe it. A dense, rhythmic, shuffling, dragging sound, like a crowd moving slowly over grass and gravel. It lasted for approximately 40 minutes. It didn't repeat. I went to the intake pipe and put my ear as close to the end cap as I could, and just listened. The sound had a quality to it, not random, but not purposeful either. Not marching, not the cadence of organized movement. More like the way water moves when you pour it slowly. Each element separate, but all going the same direction, for no discernible individual reason. I turned the blower off so the mechanical noise wasn't competing, and for those 40 minutes I just listened. They passed close enough that I could, once, hear individual sounds within the larger mass. A single voice, not words, just sound. High-pitched, not a scream. Something else. And below it, the constant shuffle. After they passed, I stayed in the operations room for a long time. I had known, intellectually, that the infected would be moving through this area. This was rural Indiana, but there were towns nearby. A mid-sized city 20 minutes by car. Countless smaller communities in every direction. I'd known they'd be out there. But hearing them was something different from knowing. The ground above me was 12 inches of reinforced concrete, topped with 4 feet of packed earth. I'd tested the roof to carry the weight of a loaded grain truck, which was about the heaviest thing that might realistically park over it. 12 infected walking on the surface above the bunker roof would not register to the structure. 100 would not register. 1,000, probably, would not register. I told myself this while I listened. It helped maybe 60%. The sound passed and didn't come back, but I'd heard it, and I knew, now, in a way I hadn't fully integrated before, that the surface above me was occupied. Not occasionally, not as a passing concern. Occupied, transformed, something else's territory now. I wrote in my verbal log that evening, they're here. This is their world now, not a world with them in it. That's the difference. I've thought about that distinction a lot since. Month 4. The first thing started breaking. The water pump hand mechanism in the mechanical room developed a friction problem. The bearing on the pump arm was wearing in a way I hadn't caught in my pre-occupancy inspections. Not a critical failure, just a degraded performance. The pump still worked but required more effort per stroke, and made a grinding noise that I found deeply irritating and also slightly worrying. Because wear problems tend to get worse before they get better. I had spare parts. Not for everything, but for the most likely failure points. I'd spent a full weekend in 2022 going through my equipment lists and ordering spares based on mean time to failure estimates for each component. The pump bearing was in there. I pulled the mechanical room shelf apart, found the spare bearing in a labeled plastic bag, and replaced it. Took me 4 hours because the space was tight, and one of the access bolts was in a position where I had to lie on my back with my arm at an angle that my shoulder was not happy about. The bearing replacement worked. The pump ran smoothly after. But it was a reminder. Things fail. I had spares for the likely failures, but 8 years of planning cannot anticipate every failure. Some things would break, and I wouldn't have what I needed to fix them, and that moment was eventually going to come. And when it did, I'd have to make a decision about going to the surface. I'd been thinking about that possibility since month 1. Not planning it yet, just thinking about it. What would constitute a reason good enough to risk the surface? Critical system failure was one. Food supply drop below a certain threshold was another. I had a rough list, a decision matrix in my head. Not rigid, not a rule I'd commit to before knowing the context. More like a framework. In month 4, I did a formal supply inventory. Not just a mental estimate, a physical count of every item, noted against my original catalog, with a calculation of days remaining at current consumption rate. I did this over 3 days because it required pulling things off shelves and counting and replacing, and I wanted to be precise. The result was sobering. I had consumed more than I'd planned in months 1 and 2. Not through waste. I hadn't wasted anything. But through slightly higher caloric intake during the high-stress early weeks. The difference wasn't huge, but projected out, it meant I was looking at running critically low on certain food categories, specifically protein, around the 14 to 16 month mark, rather than the 18 months I'd planned for. 14 to 16 months from October was December to February of the following year, which was now only 8 to 10 months away. I adjusted my daily intake downward. Not dramatically, I wasn't starving myself, but a calculated reduction that brought my projections back in line. The adjustment was roughly 300 calories less per day, which sounds minor until your underground and physical and mental activity are your only sources of stimulation, and 300 calories is the difference between feeling adequately fed and feeling slightly hungry all the time. I got used to it. You get used to most things, given long enough. Month 4 was also when I started mapping the surface. By mapping, I mean I started building a mental and eventually physical picture of what might be accessible from the bunker and why. Not planning supply runs yet, just reconnaissance in my head. From my property, what was within practical walking distance? What had been in those locations that might still be usable? The closest structure to my property was a farmhouse about half a mile south, had belonged, to a man named Walt Draper, who I'd seen twice in my years of owning the property, both times at a distance. He kept cattle and had a large equipment shed. That equipment shed was potentially very useful. Farm equipment means fuel tanks, maintenance supplies, tools. The farmhouse itself might have food stores. Rural farm families tend to keep substantial food supplies. 2 miles east was a small town, Hazleton, Indiana, population around 800. A main street, a Dollar General, a gas station and auto parts store, a grain elevator, a Methodist church, and maybe 30 houses along 2 parallel roads. 800 people. Some percentage infected. Some percentage. I didn't let myself think too hard about what percentage, otherwise. 5 miles north, the county road hit a state highway. Along that highway were more substantial resources, a combination fuel station and convenience store, a farming supply center, and a small grocery that served the rural communities in that part of the county. Everything I'd need was out there. The question was, what was also out there? Month 5. The generator fuel situation became what I'd call a moderate crisis. Not an emergency, not yet, but a number that was trending in the wrong direction faster than I'd like. I'd been running the generator conservatively since month 1, but the battery bank had developed a reduced charge capacity. One of the cells in the bank was degraded, which meant the solar-to-battery transfer efficiency was lower than it should have been, which meant I was calling on the generator more often to compensate. I replaced the bad cell with a spare I had, fixed the immediate problem, but the generator had also been running long enough that the oil needed changing, and while I had oil, I'd stored a substantial amount of oil. The process of doing an oil change in the mechanical room is tight, unpleasant work. I did it. It took most of a day, and I smelled like diesel for 2 days after even, with thorough washing. The fuel tanks were at 63% of original capacity. Running my revised usage calculations, I had roughly 4 to 5 months of generator fuel at current consumption. After that, I'd be on pure solar, which was workable in summer months but marginal in winter. This is what started pushing the supply run calculation from future consideration to active planning. I also, in month 5, found something I wasn't expecting. I was doing a thorough inspection of the bunker's outer wall, just walking the perimeter of the structure, checking for any sign of moisture intrusion, any cracks in the concrete, anything that looked different than it had in my baseline inspection 8 months before. I was doing this in the section of wall between the mechanical room and the operations room, a stretch of about 15 feet that I accessed through a narrow passage behind the food shelving. I found a door. Not a new door, an old one, roughly 2 feet by 4 feet, set into the concrete block at ground level, with a frame that had been mortared in place. Not in my original plans, not in my construction records, not something I'd ever seen in all my inspections over 8 years of building and 4 months of living here. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got a flashlight and stared at it more. It had been there for a while. The mortar around the frame was old, the same generation of aging as the original Cold War-era drainage construction I'd built into. Concrete work from the 60s or 70s, which meant this door had been here before me, before my bunker. There was something here, something I'd built into, that I hadn't known about, that I'd somehow missed in my initial excavation and construction. Or, and this was the thought that settled into me slowly, someone had been very careful to make sure I didn't know about it. I didn't open it that day. I noted it in my log. I looked at it from every angle. I tried to determine what was on the other side by looking at my site plans and calculating where in the physical geography it would open to. Based on my plans, it would open toward the northeast, roughly in the direction of the east boundary of my property. I spent 2 days thinking about whether to open it. I opened it. The passage beyond was 4 feet high and about 3 feet wide, brick-lined, with a concrete floor that had a slight slope downward. It smelled different from the bunker, older, earthier, a specific underground cold that was distinct from my temperature-controlled space. I had to crouch to move through it. It went 22 feet. I paced it, then turned left for another 8 feet, then ended at what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. Except it wasn't quite solid. There was a seam I could feel with my fingers, and at the right side of the seam, about 2 feet up from the floor, something that might once have been a latch mechanism, long since seized with age and oxidation. I worked on it for 3 hours with a spray can of penetrant lubricant from my tool supply and a set of picks. Eventually, slowly, the mechanism moved. What was behind it was not another room. It was a vertical shaft, about 3 feet in diameter, brick-lined, going up, iron rungs set into the brick. I shone my flashlight up and could see it went about 15 feet vertically before opening into what looked like a wood-framed structure above, boards across the top, with thin lines of gray light showing between them. Daylight. Filtered, gray, indirect daylight coming through what I eventually determined, when I climbed up a day later with better preparation, was the floor of a very old outbuilding, a corn crib or grain storage structure, based on the horizontal slatted walls, that had been abandoned for so long that the floor had partially rotted. The slats were still there, and keeping weather out, mostly, but some had split, and a few had fallen, and what came through was gray ambient outdoor light. I did not go all the way out through the floor of that structure. I climbed to the top of the shaft and looked through the gaps in the floorboards above me. I saw sky, gray, early March sky, and the angle of the land, and about 80 yards away, the corner of a fence line. I could hear nothing. I went back down. I spent 2 days thinking about what this meant. The shaft was an exit I hadn't known I had. Not safe, not fortified, not controllable, not something I could lock from below in any reliable way. But it was a second way out, and if the main hatch was ever compromised, it was a backup. Also, it was a way to observe the surface without being on the surface, which was a capability I hadn't had before. I also spent considerable time wondering who had built it. The brick and iron were old, decades old. This was something from the original farm infrastructure, or possibly something related to Cold War civilian preparedness efforts, which had more local implementations than most people realize. Someone, decades ago, had built a tunnel between 2 points on this property. Whether they'd known about each other is unknowable at this distance. Whether anyone had used it since, unknowable too. The day after I found the shaft, I was up at the top of it looking through the gaps in the rotted floorboards, and I saw the first one. It was on the edge of the tree line to my northeast, about 130 yards away. Standing still, not doing anything. Just standing in the open, facing roughly my direction, in the gray morning light. A person-shaped figure that was very obviously not doing what a living person would do in a cold Indiana morning in March. No movement, no breath vapor I could see, just standing. For maybe 10 minutes it stood there. Then it turned, slowly, and walked into the trees. I watched the tree line for another hour. Nothing else appeared. But the figure had established something I needed to know. They were here, right here, on my property, in my trees, in the morning. Not a mass of them, at least not this morning, but present, singular, and present. I went back down the shaft and sat in the passage for a long time, with the flashlight off. The surface run I'd been planning in the abstract became suddenly, specifically real. Let me tell you how I planned it. Everything about the supply run came down to 3 questions. Where to go, when to go, how to move, where. I eliminated the town first. Hazleton was too dense. 800 people, some percentage infected, narrow streets, buildings I didn't know the layout of, too many variables. The farm half a mile south, Walt Draper's place, was the better first run. Contained, known terrain, potentially high yield, and most importantly, close. If something went wrong and I had to run back to the bunker, I could cover half a mile at a dead run in about 4 minutes, which in a bad scenario might be the difference. When, my best intelligence, from the months of listening to the intake pipes and watching through the shaft top, was that the infected moved in a pattern, not a conscious pattern, not anything with intention behind it. But there were certain times of day, early morning, just after dawn, and late afternoon, when I heard more movement above. During midday, things seemed quieter. This might have been observation bias on my part, but it also made sense in a mechanical way. Bright midday light, if their visual system worked at all, might make things harder for them than the low-angle light of early or late day. I didn't know. I was guessing. But middle of the day was when I'd go. How? Silence above everything. No engine noise. I was going on foot. I had a compound bow and 50 arrows, and I'd been keeping my form up by shooting into a foam target I'd made from packing material. Not perfect practice, but enough to maintain basic accuracy. The bow had a fixed draw weight of 65 pounds, and with my field points at 20 yards, I was consistently within a 3-inch group. That was the primary weapon. The shotgun was in a chest rig, loaded, safety on, last resort. The noise of a fired shotgun in an open rural area could carry half a mile or more, and I did not want to learn the hard way what half a mile's worth of infected looked like converging on a position. My second concern, below noise, was odor. This was something I'd read about in a handful of accounts that had come through on radio traffic. Other survivors describing behavioral patterns they'd observed. The infected seemed to track odor, not with sophisticated olfactory tracking like a bloodhound, more like a basic attraction to the smell of living mammals, sweat especially, the smell of a person who's afraid and moving. I spent 3 days before the run not bathing with soap. Then the morning of the run, I rubbed myself down with soil from a small amount I'd brought inside. Actual Indiana dirt, with its particular organic decomposed leaf smell, and wore my oldest clothes, ones that had been stored long enough that the fabric smell was more basement than human. I know this sounds like superstition. It might be, but the logic wasn't unreasonable, and it cost me nothing. The actual run was March 15th. I went up the new shaft, not the main hatch, which was around the front of the property, in a more open area. The old shaft exit came out in the outbuilding, which was partially sheltered by the tree line, which gave me a better initial exit position. I'd spent 3 days before the run loosening the rotted floorboards above the shaft, so I could push through quietly. The moment I got my head above the floorboards and into the open air, the first time I'd breathed actual outside air in 5 months, I had to stop. Not from danger, from the smell. There's no way to prepare for what the outside world smells like after 5 months underground in filtered air. Everything. Everything at once. Wet soil. Decay from the leaf litter still on the ground from autumn. Cold air that had a quality to it I can only describe as dimension, depth, complexity, variation. Like the difference between a photograph of a meal and the actual meal. My nose took in information at a rate that my brain had to catch up to, and for a moment I just knelt there on the threshold of the floorboards with my eyes moving in every direction at once, and my lungs doing something that wasn't quite breathing and wasn't quite crying. Then I got myself together. The property was clear to the immediate south. I moved low, staying near the fence line, heading toward the Draper farm. The ground was cold and firm. March in Indiana can be mud or frost, depending on the week, and this week it was frost, and my footsteps on frozen grass were quiet, but not silent. I reached the edge of the Draper property in 14 minutes. The fence was standard 4-wire cattle fence, which I'd crossed easily in my initial property survey years ago. I went through it on my belly, the compound bow slung across my back. The equipment shed was visible from the fence. A metal building, maybe 40 by 60 feet, with a sliding door that was partially open. The cattle pen alongside it was empty. No cattle, no remains of cattle, just empty. The farmhouse was 200 yards beyond the shed, white clapboard, one of those Midwestern 2-story farmhouses that look exactly like every other Midwestern 2-story farmhouse. I stayed at the fence line and watched for 10 minutes. One thing I'd read, back in the early days when I was still getting sporadic information, was that the infected can seem motionless for extended periods. Not sleeping, not dormant in any sleeping sense, just not moving, standing or sitting, not doing anything, then triggered by sound or movement into activity. How triggered depended on how close you were and how much noise you made. Close range, any movement would trigger them. Farther away, significant noise or rapid movement was required. This was based on second-hand accounts from radio traffic. I didn't know how reliable it was. I was about to find out. I moved from the fence to the equipment shed in a low run, 40 feet, staying below the shed's sight line from the farmhouse. Got to the shed wall and put my back against it. Breathed, listened. Nothing. I went in through the partially open sliding door. The shed held a John Deere tractor in rough condition, a smaller Kubota utility vehicle, and a wall of shelving I went straight to. Hand tools, wrenches, socket sets, bolt cutters, wire, heavy chain, a large rolling tool cabinet, agricultural chemicals I had no use for, and in the back left corner, a metal cabinet, bolted to the wall, that I was hoping would contain what I was actually here for. It did. Spare diesel cans. 6 of them. Military-style 5-gallon containers in olive drab. I unscrewed one and sniffed. Diesel. Maybe 18 months old based on the smell, which is still usable with a fuel stabilizer treatment. And I had stabilizer in the bunker. 6 cans was 30 gallons. Not a huge amount, but meaningful. There was also a parts supply area with oil filters and motor oil. 3 gallons of diesel engine oil, same weight as my generator required. I took all of it. The shed also had, sitting on a low shelf, 4 cases of bottled water and 2 partial cases of canned food. Hunting season supplies, based on the labeling. The kind of thing a farmer puts in an outbuilding for deer camp. I went through it quickly. Pork and beans, condensed soup, fruit cocktail, crackers in a sealed tin. Not a lot, but real. I loaded everything I was taking into the pack I'd carried from the bunker. The pack was now uncomfortably heavy. I prioritized the oil cans over water. The water situation in the bunker was fine. The fuel was not. Left 2 cans of diesel because I couldn't carry more. I was in the shed for 9 minutes. When I came out, there were 2 of them between me and the fence line. They hadn't been there when I went in. They'd come from somewhere during those 9 minutes. The tree line to the east, most likely, following some trigger I hadn't created intentionally, or had created and didn't know about. They were roughly 60 feet from me, both standing still, facing my general direction. I froze against the shed wall. They didn't react to the freeze. Their heads moved. Slow, irregular movement, like an animal that hears something but can't locate the source. One of them took 2 steps toward me, then stopped. The other one turned 45 degrees to the south and started walking. Slowly. 60 feet. I had the compound bow up in my hands. I'd unslung it while in the shed, and at 60 feet with this bow, I was very confident of a first shot. But the draw sound, even with my draw dampeners, was audible in quiet air, and the arrow impact was audible. And any distress sound from the target could draw more. I didn't shoot. I waited. The second one, the one that had walked south, was moving away, which meant it wasn't focused on me. The first one stood for another 30 seconds, moved 2 more steps in my direction, stopped again. 50 feet now. I backed along the wall of the shed, slowly, toward the rear of the building, the back corner. If I could get around the back of the shed and approach the fence from a different angle, 40 yards east of where I'd crossed originally, I had a clear run. The one coming toward me stopped again, Its head moved. There was something about the movement that I registered as different from intentional searching, less systematic, like a machine running without a clear program. It turned slightly left, stopped, turned back. I moved around the corner. Once behind the shed, I couldn't see them anymore, which meant they couldn't see me. I crossed the rear of the shed quickly, 40 feet to the east fence, went through in 30 seconds flat, and moved low through the field on the other side. I got back to the bunker shaft in 9 minutes. I'd been on the surface for 41 minutes. I sat at the bottom of the shaft with the loaded pack across my lap for 20 minutes, before I could slow my pulse down enough to feel normal. I went out twice more in March. The second run was to the Draper farmhouse itself. I'd seen enough of the exterior during the first run to be reasonably confident it wasn't densely occupied. Farmhouses in this part of Indiana tend to have full basements used for storage, and I was right. The basement stairs were through the kitchen, and the kitchen shelves had canning jars. Home-canned vegetables, tomatoes, green beans, pickled beets, corn relish. Dozens of jars. Walt Draper, or more likely Walt Draper's late wife, based on the domestic character of the storage, had been canning for decades. The jars were dated and organized. I took 32 jars in a single run, left the rest. Came back for another load the next day because I couldn't carry more than that, and the pack was already destroying my back. The farmhouse had one infected in it, in the front sitting room. I heard it before I saw it. That particular shuffling, dragging sound, and I stopped in the kitchen doorway and waited. It wasn't moving toward me. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and I'd come through the back door, and the infected was in the front room and hadn't detected me. I did what I needed to do in the kitchen and the basement and left through the back. It never moved toward me. I haven't been able to stop thinking about that. A person in that room, whatever was left of who they'd been, standing in their own front room, not going anywhere, just existing in that particular terrible way. When I left, I closed the back door carefully behind me. I don't know why that mattered to me. It just did. The third March run was the gas station, 5 miles north. I drove it. I know, I said no engine noise, but the 30-gallon fuel return from the Draper shed had bought me enough that I had operating margin, and I needed to get significantly more supplies than foot travel could carry, and I'd spent 2 weeks planning the vehicle run very carefully. The plan was simple. Minimal time on road, maximum load, engine off whenever stationary. Specific route that avoided the main township roads and used 2 county roads that I knew from memory to be lightly traveled even before the outbreak. I took the truck. I went at 11 in the morning on a clear Tuesday because clear days seemed quieter, based on all my intake pipe observation. I had no scientific basis for this, but dead reckoning is what you have when you don't have data. The gas station was called Renfrew Fuel and Farm Supply, a combination fuel stop, small hardware section, hunting and fishing equipment, with a refrigerated case that was obviously long dead, but which had contained shelf-stable items too. It was also, importantly, an auto parts and agricultural supply location, which meant it had things I needed beyond food. I pulled the truck around back of the station, killed the engine, waited 5 minutes listening. Nothing. Went in through the employee entrance in back. The station had been hit before me. That was immediately clear. Shelving disturbed. Some areas completely cleared. The glass candy case smashed. Someone had been here, probably multiple someones, in the first weeks or months, but they hadn't taken everything. The top shelves along the far wall, which required something to stand on, were mostly untouched. The kind of thing people in a panic don't think to look up at. I found canned goods, motor oil, automotive fluids, a serious first aid kit still in its box, a 12-pack of emergency candles, 2 rechargeable LED lanterns, and an extensive selection of hunting and fishing supplies. I took the medical supplies first, all of them. Suture kits, antiseptic, gauze, medical tape, extra bandaging, a blood pressure cuff that duplicated what I already had. Redundancy is good. Then food, then tools. The fuel pumps were dead, no power, but the station had above-ground storage for propane in a cage off the side of the building. I hadn't planned for propane. I looked at it for a second and grabbed my bolt cutters from the truck. I came home with 4 20-pound propane cylinders and everything I could fit in the truck bed. The drive back took 11 minutes. No encounters on the road. I saw, from the road, 2 figures in a field about 300 yards south. They weren't moving toward me. I drove past. I got back to the property, parked the truck in the equipment barn position, where it had less visual exposure, and transferred everything underground. Then I sat in the bunker kitchen and ate 3 cans of warm chicken soup in a row and felt, for the first time in 5 months, something that wasn't anxiety. Not happiness. Not relief. Just an absence of the specific knot that had been in my chest since October. Like a piece of pressure I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't structural. April arrived and things got complicated. The first complication was the voice on the radio. I was doing my evening shortwave scan on April 3rd when I caught a signal on a frequency I'd logged previously as dead, a local emergency frequency that had been silent since month 1. The signal was weak, static heavy, but unmistakably live. If anyone out there, this is a general call, frequency 11.4. We have approximately, static, northeast of I-65, at the Glenbrook Community Church, and we have medical needs. Static, food for 2 more weeks, maximum. Static, anyone with resources, we are requesting. I sat there with my notebook and my pen. Then I called back. I know how that sounds. I know the risk assessment math, but a voice on a frequency that had been dead for months, calling for help from what sounded like a real location. You try ignoring that and see how long you can. This is a responding station, I said. You came through. Partial. Audio is breaking up. Can you hear me? Static. Then, yes. Yes, we can hear you. Oh God. Yes. What's your situation? How many people? 9. We have 9 people. There are 3 children. A pause. The voice was a woman's, middle-aged, trying to sound controlled and not quite making it. We have 2 people with injuries. One needs, static. Possible infection in a wound, not bite, we think. Cut on a fence. What's your location? Exactly. She gave me a crossroads. I checked the map. 11 miles from my property, northeast. Glenbrook Community Church, which I had not been to, but could locate on the county road system. 9 people, 3 of them kids. Okay, I said. I hear you. Can you hold position for 72 hours? Are you secure where you are? A pause. I could hear voices in the background, low, urgent. We can try, the woman said. The building is reasonably secure, but the infected have been closer each night. We can hear them. Okay. My name is Owen. What's your name? Nora. A breath. Nora Hadfield. Okay. Nora, I need you to trust me for 72 hours. I'm coming, but I need to plan this. Don't move from your location. Are you all injured? 2. One might need antibiotics soon. She paused. I'm a nurse. Was a nurse. The wound is showing signs I don't like. A nurse. I sat with that for a moment. I have antibiotics, I said. Silence. Thank you, she said. And the way she said it, 2 words, flat, direct, told me something about who she was. No tears in it, just acknowledgement. 72 hours, I said. Check this frequency every 6 hours. If I'm not there in 72, I'm not coming. And you should think about moving, but I'll try. Okay? Nora. Yes. Who else have you got in there? Who can move and fight if needed? A pause while she thought. Doug. He's 23. He's fit. Patrick. He's in his 50s. Ex-military. Gulf War. Claire. She's a school teacher. She's okay. The others are varying. Is Patrick mobile? Yes. Okay. Tell Patrick and Doug to stay armed and to stay away from windows after dark. Tell them I'm coming. I will. I need to tell you what I felt after that call, because I need to be honest about it. I felt terrified, not just of the risk of the journey, though that was real. I felt terrified of what happened if I brought 9 people back to the bunker. 9 people, in a space designed for 4, maximum, with food supplies already running lower than planned for one, with a location that had been secret, that I'd spent 8 years keeping secret, because the entire logic of the bunker was that nobody knew where it was. If 9 people knew where it was, the secret was gone. Any one of them could tell someone, intentionally or not. Any one of them could be followed. Any one of them could make a decision that compromised everything. And there were 3 kids. Kids make noise. Kids have needs that don't fit into a rationed, routine survival calculation. I sat with all of this for 2 hours. Then I packed a run kit. Because here's the other side of the calculation. And I know this about myself well enough by now to just say it plainly. I had spent 8 years building something I told myself was about survival, about preparedness, about being ready for the worst. But I had also, somewhere in the back of all that building, assumed that I was building it for more than just myself. That's what the 4-bunk capacity was for. That's what the extra supplies were for. I hadn't built the bunker because I planned to save exactly 1 person. I'd built it because I was afraid of loss, afraid of the kind of systemic failure I'd spent years mapping. And somewhere in that fear was also its opposite, which was a belief that survival was worth working for. If I left a nurse and 3 children and 6 other people to die in a church 11 miles away, I would be the thing I was most afraid of becoming, someone who was right about the math and wrong about everything else. I told myself this. Then I went to sleep, which took 2 hours and didn't really work. And at 5 in the morning on April 4th, I loaded the truck and drove to Glenbrook Community Church. The drive was 20 minutes and felt like 20 hours. I took the county roads I knew, the ones I'd already scouted partially on the last run. The morning was cold and clear, and completely silent in the way that April mornings in Indiana should not be. No birds. That was the thing that hit me hardest as I drove. October had been bad, but October was also late fall in the Midwest, and bird activity drops anyway. April is different. April is supposed to have birds, robins and red-winged blackbirds, and the early returning warblers. The fields along the county roads should have had birdsong. Nothing, just the sound of the truck engine and the wind over the cab. I saw 4 infected during the drive. 3 were in a field about a quarter mile off the road, visible only as figures moving slowly in the wrong direction for any normal human purpose. The 4th was on the road itself, standing on the center line facing north. I slowed, evaluated, determined it wasn't going to move, and went around it at walking speed on the shoulder. It turned its head, but didn't move its body. The church was visible from a quarter mile back. White clapboard, a small bell tower, a parking lot on the south side with 3 vehicles in it. I could see boards over 2 of the lower windows. Someone had nailed lumber over them from inside. There was a light on in one of the upper windows, battery-powered or candle, very dim. I stopped the truck at the parking lot entrance and sat for 90 seconds. Then I got out, went to the bed of the truck, and knocked 3 times on the metal bed rail, the signal I'd given Nora on the radio. Wait at the door. 3 knocks. The church's front door opened. The man in the doorway was in his 50s, compact, holding a deer rifle at the ready, with the barrel down but his grip ready. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Owen?" he said. "Patrick," I said. He nodded, stepped back, in. The interior of the church was dim and smelled like candle wax, and people who'd been in an enclosed space together for too long. The pews had been pushed to the walls. In the middle of the floor was a collection of sleeping bags and bundled coats, and in those were the people. Nora was the first one up, a woman in her mid-40s with short dark hair and very direct eyes, wearing scrubs under a winter coat. She shook my hand, which I hadn't expected. "Any trouble on the way here?" she said. "Minor. One on the road. Went around it." "How far out?" "About 6 miles from here. Center line of Route 9. She nodded, made a mental note of it, moved on. "We need to look at Doug's arm. He's the one with the wound. I've been managing it, but I don't have anything strong enough to. I have amoxicillin and doxycycline. What does it look like?" She looked at me for a moment. "The right antibiotic, and I think he'll be fine. It's not deep. It's just..." She lowered her voice. It's been 12 days. We've been stretching what we had. Doug was 23 and looked like he hadn't slept in a week, which he probably hadn't. The wound was on his left forearm, a deep gash from a fence wire, she'd said on the radio. It had been cleaned and dressed, but the edges were showing the puffy pink of early infection, not progressing fast, but progressing. I cleaned it again with proper antiseptic from my kit, rebandaged it, and gave him an amoxicillin course. Told him to take the full course, even when it started feeling better. He nodded, said thank you, in a voice that was too tight, looked away. The 3 children were a 10-year-old named Eli, his 7-year-old sister Bex, and a quiet 13-year-old named Audrey, who had nothing to say about herself, and watched everything from a corner with careful eyes. Eli and Bex were the children of a man named Ray and his wife Helen. Ray was one of the healthy ones, a heavy-set man in his late 30s who shook my hand and didn't say much. Helen had a sprained ankle, wrapped, mobile but slow. Claire was the school teacher Nora had mentioned, mid-40s, lean, with a calm that either indicated internal steadiness or shock, and I hadn't known her long enough to know which. She was doing something when I arrived. She was teaching Eli and Bex, actually teaching them, using a notebook and a pen, working through what looked like arithmetic. I watched her for a moment. She kept going without acknowledging me. That told me something. The 9th person was a man named Dennis. He was older, maybe 65, and he was quiet in a way that had weight to it, like the quiet was a choice rather than a default. I found out later he had been the pastor of this church before the outbreak. That explained the choice of location. And maybe something about the way he held himself. Not praying, not proselytizing, just present, in the specific way of someone who has spent a long time learning to be present with people in hard moments. "How did you all end up together?" I asked Nora when we had a minute. "Ray and Helen live nearby," she said. "They came to the church when things started. Dennis had put the word out on a local frequency, first week, saying the church was a meeting point. I was on that frequency because I'd been listening to the emergency band since day 1. When I heard that, I came. Patrick was driving through. He had some vehicle trouble and heard Ray's truck and came over. Doug was..." She paused. "Doug was alone. Found the church by accident. He came through the window, a slight pull at the corner of her mouth. He didn't know about the door." "And Audrey?" The pull went away. She was in the church already when Dennis got here. I didn't ask more about Audrey. I told them about the bunker in the most careful way I could, which was not fully. I said I had a secure location about 11 miles southwest. I said it had food, water, power, and medical supplies. I said it had capacity for the group. I didn't say how long it had taken me to build, didn't say how much I had, didn't say anything about the systems or the layout. Just, secure location, come with me. Patrick asked the question I'd expected. "Who else knows where it is?" "Nobody," I said. He held eye contact. "Nobody at all. I've been there alone since October. You'll be the first people." He thought about that. "And you're trusting us with it." "I'm considering it," I said honestly. "I need another 30 minutes with all of you first." What I did in those 30 minutes was talk to each person individually, briefly, which I know is an imperfect vetting process. But you can learn a lot from 30 minutes if you're paying attention. Not to what people say. People say what they think they should say in high-stakes situations. What they do, how they hold themselves, whether their story has internal consistency, whether they listen when you talk, or wait for you to finish so they can talk, whether their eyes are tracking things the same way yours are. Patrick was clear. Military background was real. You can hear it in how someone organizes a sentence under pressure, the way information is sequenced. His age and physical condition said he'd work hard and be useful. Nora was clear. Medical competence is obvious in a specific way. She didn't say, "I can help with medical stuff." She'd said specific things about specific conditions, with specific treatments. That's real knowledge, not claimed knowledge. Ray was straightforward. A farmer, smart in the ways farmers are smart. Practical, observational, low drama. Helen was injured but alert. The kids were kids. Claire I trusted without quite knowing why. Something about the teaching. People doing the thing they'd been trained to do even in extremis, without being asked. That's genuine character rather than performance. Dennis I didn't know what to do with. He was serene in a way that felt earned rather than false. But I've been wrong about serene people before. Doug was the one I watched most carefully. He was 23, educated, fit, recovering from an infection. Nothing about his manner was wrong, but there was something in the way he answered questions. A slight lag, like he was checking his answer before giving it, that I'd noticed in engineering job interviews and had learned to pay attention to. Could be nerves, could be something else. I didn't know. I filed it. "Okay," I said, when I'd gotten through everyone. "Get your things. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Stay close to the vehicle. If anything happens on the road, nobody stops for anything. We're not stopping. We're not getting out. We're going to the location and securing inside. Understood?" Nobody argued. We loaded the truck bed with their supplies. It was less than I'd expected. 12 days had burned through a lot of what they'd had. I got everyone in, Nora and Claire in the cab front with me, everyone else in the bed under a tarp, which was uncomfortable but manageable for 11 miles, and which reduced the visual profile of the truck. We made it to the property in 18 minutes. I don't want to make the drive sound more dramatic than it was. It was tense, and about 3 miles out, we came through a section of county road that had what I can only describe as a trail of damage, fencing down on both sides, as if something large had moved through, or a vehicle had gone off the road, or both. But we got through it without stopping. The only infected I saw on the drive was the same one on Route 9 I'd noted on the way in, still on the center line, facing the same direction. It had moved maybe 20 yards from where I'd seen it earlier. Still didn't know what to do with that. We got through the property gate. I drove around back to the equipment barn, killed the engine. "Everyone out, quietly," I said. "Move to the barn entrance. I'll show you where we're going." I took them down the ramp, through the hatch, into the bunker. The look on Nora's face when she got to the bottom of the ramp and saw the main space, the lights, the organized shelving, the cleanness of it, was a look I hadn't seen directed at anything I'd built before. She didn't say anything. She just stood there and looked. Claire said, behind her, in a voice almost too quiet to hear, "Oh, thank God." Eli, the 10-year-old, said, "Is this a spaceship?" 4 days with 9 other people in 1,200 square feet is a revelation if you've been alone for 5 months. The first 24 hours were mostly just physical adjustment, finding where everyone was going to sleep, the 4 berths plus every flat surface that could be padded with sleeping bags, establishing a bathroom rotation for the single composting toilet I'd built in, figuring out cooking for 10 rather than 1, the 1,000 small logistics of shared space. I was not a particularly patient person by nature, and 5 months of solitude had not improved that, but I managed to keep it together, because the logistics needed managing, and my head was too full to also be irritated. Nora took over the medical corner I'd set up, a corner of the main room with the first aid supplies and the medication storage, with an efficiency that was almost territorial. I didn't mind. She knew what she was doing and I didn't, in the medical sense. And having a nurse with actual supplies was better than having me guess at dosages. Doug's arm was responding to the antibiotics by day 2. The redness was pulling back. He had more energy. On day 3, he asked me what he could do to help, and I put him on water pump duty, checking the system twice daily, logging the output, which was something I'd been doing alone, and which freed me to focus on the more complex systems. Patrick appointed himself on security, which I would have done for him anyway. He spent his time mapping the main hatch and the shaft exit, understanding the approaches, developing a watching protocol for the ventilation pipe audio monitoring. He came to me on day 2 with a notebook full of notes. "Your listening setup for the intake pipe," he said. "It's good, but we're losing a lot of signal to the blower noise. If we put the blower on a timer and do dedicated listening intervals, we'd catch more." He was right. I hadn't thought of that exact optimization, because I'd been doing it alone with divided attention. I adjusted the blower schedule. Ray and Helen took over food prep, which was a relief because I was a functional but joyless cook, and Helen turned out to be good in a resourceful way. She could make canned food taste like something. which is not a small skill. She'd look at what I had on the shelf and put combinations together that I wouldn't have thought of. The first meal she made for all of us, day 2, was a pinto bean and canned tomato stew with garlic powder and dried oregano over rice. And it was the best thing I'd eaten in 5 months by a distance. That was embarrassing. Dennis was quiet. He helped where he was directed. Didn't impose. Didn't preach. He read. He talked to the kids in a way that settled them. Audrey, the 13-year-old, had said nothing to me since arrival, but by day 2, I could see her talking to Dennis in a low voice, and he was listening in that way he had of making you feel heard without commenting. Claire set up a school. I mean this literally. She identified a corner of the main room, dragged 2 crates over as seating, and began teaching Eli and Bex 4 hours a day. Math, reading, a bit of science using the reference books on my shelf. She asked my permission to use the books, and I said of course. She nodded and went back to the corner. That was essentially our entire personal interaction for the first week. I watched all of it with a specific, complicated feeling that I kept returning to in my head. I had built this thing alone. 8 years alone, building it, planning it, believing in it when everyone told me I was wrong. And now it was full of people who were alive because of it. And the full space was warmer and louder and more complicated than the empty space had been. And some part of me found the fullness jarring, and some part of me found it exactly right, like a building that had been waiting for load bearing. The person I was watching most carefully was Doug. Not aggressively, not obviously, but watching. On day 4, I was in the operations room doing my evening radio check when Doug appeared in the doorway. He looked at the radio setup, the shortwave, the scanner, the logging notebook, with an attention that was slightly more studied than casual curiosity. "What do you usually catch?" he asked. "Depends on the night. Shortwave, sometimes overseas broadcasts. Military frequency traffic, occasionally. Ham operators, less than before. Anything recent about organized groups, like survivor communities?" I turned to look at him. "What kind of groups?" He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "I just mean, I was part of a group before I ended up at the church. For about a month after the outbreak, I was with a group of about 30 people in a community outside Columbus. They had a camp set up. What happened to the group?" "They got overrun," he said. "Horde came through in December. I got out, some others got out. We scattered." "Were you with the Columbus group? What was it called?" A pause. Short but present. "They didn't really have a name. It was just people who got together." "Who was running it?" Another pause. "There was a guy named Garrett who was kind of the organizer. He had military background. Or claimed he did." "Claimed." Doug met my eyes. "Yeah. There were things about Garrett that didn't feel right. That's partly why I left before the Horde came. I was already looking for an exit." I let that sit for a moment. "How many of the group scattered? Who's out there?" "I don't know. Maybe 15 to 20 that got out, that I saw. Where they went." He shrugged. "I haven't had contact." I nodded. Turned back to the radio. "Thanks for telling me." "Owen." I turned again. "I know you're watching me," he said. Not accusatory, just direct. "I get it. Stranger in your place. You don't know me. I'd do the same." I looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah," I said. "I am." He nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm not going to cause you problems. I'm here because Nora had that radio, and you called back, and I'm alive because of that. Whatever you need from me, I'll do it." "That's good," I said. "I'll hold you to it." He left. I sat with the radio for another hour, thinking about Garrett. I want to tell you about the thing that happened in week 2, because it was the moment that changed everything, and I hadn't seen it coming at all. Patrick was on intake pipe listening duty at 1400 on a Wednesday. He'd been doing it for 6 days and had a good sense of the normal sound pattern. Ambient wind, the occasional wildlife movement that filtered through, no foot traffic on most days, unless they were moving through in numbers. He was methodical about it. He logged times and sounds with a brevity that told me he'd written a lot of operational logs before. He came to me at 14:15. Engines, he said. I was in the middle of adjusting a shelf bracket. I stopped. Vehicle engines? Multiple. Diesel, sounds like. Moving slow, which means either they're looking for something or the road condition is bad enough that they can't go faster. I went to the operations room. We sat at the intake pipe together and listened. He was right. The sound was faint, but unmistakable once you knew what to listen for. 2, maybe 3 diesel engines, moving from east to west based on the way the sound was shifting, coming down the county road that ran along my northern property line, moving slowly, almost searching pace. They're not following zombies, Patrick said. Speed's wrong for that, and they're not running, so there's no immediate threat behind them. Looking for something, I said. Or someone. We listened until the sound faded to the west. Doug's people? Patrick said. I had been thinking the same thing. Maybe, he said, 30 people in a Columbus camp, overrun in December, 15 to 20 scattered, if any of them reorganized. Or the guy running it. Garrett? I'm going up the shaft, I said. Patrick put a hand on my arm. Wait until morning. If they're scouting, doing it in daylight gives them a visual on you if you poke your head up. Morning, gray light. They're less likely to be in that tree line. He was right. I waited until 05:30 the next morning, when the light was still too gray for good visibility, and went up the shaft. Through the floorboard gaps I could see the northern property line fence, the county road beyond it, and the flat fields on the far side. Nothing on the road, no vehicles. But at the fence line, attached to one of the fence posts, tied there with orange surveying ribbon, was a yellow plastic bag. I'd come up in the outbuilding. The bag was 80 yards north of the outbuilding, at the road fence. Someone had left something at my fence. I watched the road and the fence line for 45 minutes. Nothing moved. Then I went back down, told Patrick, and waited 2 more hours. At mid-morning, I went out the main hatch, the first time I'd used the main hatch since the group arrived, and moved low along the east fence line to the north fence. The bag was still there. I checked in every direction twice, then untied it from the post and walked back fast. Inside the bag, a folded piece of paper. The note read, "We know you're here. We've been looking for you for 2 weeks. Doug Hartwell told us you'd found a secure shelter in this area before we lost contact with him. We're not enemies. We're 18 people, 11 adults and 7 children, and we're running out of options. We're camped at the Meridian Grain Elevator 4 miles east. If you're willing to talk, we'll come to your fence tomorrow at noon and wait for 30 minutes. If we don't hear from you, we'll move on. R.F. Farrow." I read it 3 times. Doug had told them. Not the location. They clearly didn't know the exact location, or they'd have knocked on the door. But enough. He'd told someone in his former group, before he ended up at the church, that he'd heard of a shelter in this area, or he'd transmitted it somehow, and I had been letting him use the radio for his own monitoring sessions, alone in the operations room. The 3-second delay in some of his answers. The questions about organized groups. I went to find Doug. He was helping Ray with the water pump. He saw my face as I came through the mechanical room door, and he straightened immediately. "The note," he said. I showed it to him. R. Farrow. "Is that Garrett's group?" He looked at the note. Not guilty. More like resigned. "Garrett's last name is Farrow," he said. "But that doesn't say Garrett. R could be his sister, Ryan. Is there a Ryan Farrow? Garrett's brother. Ryan was his second. He's different from Garrett." A pause. "He's better." I leaned against the wall. "Did you tell them about me?" Doug was quiet for a moment, long enough that I had my answer before he spoke. "I radioed them. About a week after we arrived here. I had a window when I was on radio duty and he stopped. I reached one of their handheld operators. I told them we were okay, that we'd found a safe location with supplies, without giving location details. I told them the area. I looked at him. "I know," he said. "You knew the whole time that I didn't want anyone to know. I knew people I thought might be alive," he said, and his voice was flat and direct, in a way that stopped me from saying the next thing I'd planned to say. 9 of them are kids. 7 of them are kids. I didn't have an exact location to give, but I told them we were in this county in a safe place, because those kids might be alive because of that. I stood with it. If you want me to leave, he said, I'll leave. Nobody leaves, I said. That's not. I pushed off the wall. I'm angry, Doug. I'll be angry for a while, but you made a call under your values, and I can't tell you those values are wrong. I can just tell you that they put us in a complicated position. I know. So here's what we're going to do, I said. Tomorrow at noon, I'm going to that fence, and you're going to come with me, because you know these people and I don't, and I need to read the situation through someone who knows what to look for. Okay, he said. And then we're going to make a decision as a group, all 10 of us, about whether to let anyone else in. He nodded. And Doug. He looked at me. No more solo radio sessions. The noon meeting was nothing like I expected. Ryan Farrow was tall, thin, probably 40, with the specific tired look of someone who's been responsible for more than one person's safety for too long. He came to the fence alone, which I'd said in a note I left at the post early that morning. He kept his hands visible. He wasn't armed that I could see, though he was almost certainly carrying. Doug was beside me at the fence. I watched Doug's body language when Ryan came into sight, because that told me more than anything Ryan could say. Doug relaxed, fractionally, visibly, the specific unwinding of someone who sees a person they trust. That told me something. You're Owen, Ryan said, when we were close enough that normal volume speech was possible. And you're Ryan. I am. He looked at Doug. You okay? I'm fine, Doug said. The antibiotics worked. Good. He looked back at me. His gaze was direct without being challenging. An important distinction. I know you didn't want to be found. I know this is a problem. I'm not here to make it worse. Tell me who you have, I said. He laid it out. 18 people, 11 adults, 7 children, 4 adults with meaningful skills, a mechanic, a former EMT, a man who'd worked in food distribution, a woman who'd been a high school chemistry teacher before. The rest were ordinary people doing their best. The children ranged from 3 years old to 16. They'd been at the grain elevator for 6 weeks, living off what was in the facility and supplementing from nearby farms. What's your food situation? I said. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we stretch. The elevator had grain. We can eat grain, technically, in a pinch, but the human digestive system doesn't love whole grain without processing, and 2 of the kids are already having trouble with it. What about your security? The elevator's defensible, but not permanently. The fence line is compromised on the east side. We've been managing, but... He paused. There's a larger problem. I waited. Garrett, he said. The name landed between us like something dropped from a height. Your brother, I said. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. My brother. He broke from the main group in January, took 8 of the adults with him. We split over how to handle resources. He has a different approach than I do. What approach? Ryan was quiet for a second. He takes what he needs, he said. He's found 2 other survivor locations in this county and He stopped. He hasn't killed anyone that I know of, but he's taken supplies by threat. He has armed people and he uses that. I looked at him carefully. And you're telling me this because you want help dealing with your brother. I'm telling you this because you need to know he's out there, Ryan said, and because he knows, through his own channels, that there's a substantial shelter somewhere in this section of the county. He doesn't have a location, but he's looking. There it was. I'd been wrong about Doug in one specific way. It wasn't Doug who'd told Garrett's people about the bunker. Doug had told Ryan's people, thinking Ryan was trustworthy, not knowing that Garrett had already separated from Ryan. And Garrett had people with communication too. How did Garrett find out? I said. Someone on the radio frequencies. He has a scanner. He's been listening to the same traffic I have. Ryan looked me in the eye. He's a better listener than most people give him credit for. And he's not stupid. How long does he have before he narrows the search area? If he's doing systematic sector sweeps, which is how he'd approach it, maybe 2 weeks. Maybe less if he gets lucky. I stood at that fence for a long moment, looking at Ryan Farrow, looking at Doug, looking at the flat Indiana fields and the trees, and the gray April sky. 18 people, I said. 18. Children. 7. Here's what I need from you, I said. 24 hours. I need 24 hours to talk to the people I'm already responsible for. Then I'll call you on this frequency. I gave him the radio channel, and tell you what we're deciding. He nodded. And Ryan. Yeah. If I say yes, you come with nothing Garrett can track. No call to anyone, no trail, no contact with his group. You go dark from the moment I say yes. I don't care what you have at the elevator that you can't carry. You take what you can carry, and you come. I understand, he said. I don't think you fully understand, I said, because I haven't explained the full picture yet. But you'll understand when you get here. I turned. Doug walked with me back toward the outbuilding. We were about halfway there when Doug said quietly, "You're going to say yes." I didn't answer. "It's not a criticism," he said. "I think it's right." "Let me have the 24 hours, I said. The group discussion was the hardest conversation I'd had since the bunker filled up. Everyone was in the main room. Nora, Patrick, Claire, Ray, Helen, Dennis, even Audrey in her corner, watching. I laid out exactly what I knew. Ryan's group, 18 people including 7 children, 3 weeks of food, a compromised location, and Garrett. Patrick's reaction was predictable and not wrong. 18 more people in here is not sustainable. You built this for 4. You told me that. I built it with 4 berths, I said. The supply question is separate. It's not separate, Nora said. She was calm, clinical. Current consumption rate with 10 people is already beyond your original single-person projection. 18 more people cuts our runway by. She did the math quickly in her head. More than half. We'd be looking at critical shortage in 4 to 5 months. That assumes no outside supply contribution, I said. Ryan has a mechanic and a food distribution professional. That's 2 people with skills we don't have yet. And 7 children, Ray said. Not accusatory, just adding to the ledger. 7 children and their people, who will be alive instead of taken over by Garrett's people or overrun by a horde. Not angry, just tired. The specific tiredness of a person who has been through enough that some moral calculations have gotten simpler. Because if we are, I don't want to be here. Helen, Ray said. I mean it, she said. If we can take children and we don't, then we've already lost the thing worth surviving for. Nobody answered that. I looked at Dennis, who hadn't spoken. Dennis. He looked at me. The math is real, he said. The supply problem is real. Garrett is real. I'm not pretending those things aren't. A pause. But Helen is also right. Some questions answer themselves when you say them out loud. I looked around the room. Patrick's face was the face of a man doing a tactical assessment. Claire had her arms folded and was looking at the floor. Nora was watching me. I'm going to tell Ryan yes, I said. That's my decision. I'm not asking for a vote, because this is my space, and ultimately my call. But I want everyone to understand what I need in exchange for that decision. I looked at each person in turn. What we need, more than more bodies, is more capability. When Ryan's group gets here, I'm going to be very specifically identifying skills and assigning roles. We're going to start an aggressive supply run program to extend our food runway. We're going to address the Garrett problem before he addresses us. And we are going to do this as a community, with a structure, not as strangers in a hole. A pause. I'm not asking anyone to take orders from me. I'm asking everyone to take responsibility for their piece of this. If you do that, we can make this work. Patrick looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, You've thought about this more than any of us. 8 years more, I said. The corner of his mouth moved. Okay, yes, let's bring them in. Ryan's group arrived the next afternoon. I'm going to tell you the part nobody expects. Among the 18 people Ryan brought to the property on April 9th, in a convoy of 2 pickup trucks and an old panel van moving slow and quiet down the county road in the gray afternoon, there was a woman I recognized. I don't mean I knew her slightly. I mean I knew her, had known her for 12 years, been married to her for 9, signed papers separating our lives in 2019. Janet was alive. She'd been with Ryan's group for 6 weeks. I saw her when they were coming down the ramp, one by one, and she came through the hatch into the bunker and stopped, and looked at the space, and then looked up and found me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. She looked thinner than I remembered, different in the way everyone was different now, in the compressed down, stripped back way that living through something does to a face. But it was her. "Owen," she said. "Janet," I said. She looked around at the bunker, at the shelving and the systems and the lights and the organized space she'd thought was insane 8 years ago. She didn't say "I told you so," and neither did I, and I think that's the most mature thing either of us ever managed. She said, "The coffee. Is there really coffee?" "Yes," I said. "Can I have some?" "Yes," I said. "Come sit down." I need to stop here and be honest about what happened in the week after Janet arrived, because it would be dishonest to write around it. She and I talked, several times, in the operations room, when the space gave us something close to privacy. The conversations were not easy. 9 years of marriage and whatever had happened between the outbreak and now. She'd been in Indianapolis when it started, had gotten out with a neighbor, had ended up in a series of increasingly difficult situations before connecting with Ryan's group in early March. The neighbor hadn't made it. 2 other people she'd been with for a while hadn't made it. She was not the person I'd been married to, in the sense that the edges were different, harder in some places, more direct, less invested in managing other people's opinions of her. I was not the person she'd been married to either. "You were right," she said, at one point, not dramatically, just as a fact. "I didn't want to be right," I said. "I know." A pause. "I knew that then too. I just couldn't." She stopped. "I couldn't live the way you were living with it. The fear. It was like watching someone drown in slow motion in a calm sea." I thought about that image for a while. "Is that what it looked like?" "That's what it felt like," she said, "from inside it. We didn't resolve anything. There wasn't anything to resolve. We were 2 people who had been through a lot separately, and were now in the same space for reasons that had nothing to do with each other, and we'd have to figure out what that meant in the margins of everything else." I gave her a bunk berth. She helped Nora with medical operations. She was competent and cooperative, and did not cause problems, and most of the time she and I functioned fine as part of the same group. Sometimes, in the evenings, we'd sit at the main table, and she'd read one of the books, and I'd do a system check log, and it felt, not like before, but like something. I don't know what to call it. Something. Ryan's mechanic was named Ford, Terry Ford, which is a name that seems engineered for the job he was doing, and within 3 days of arrival, he had identified 2 specific issues with my generator setup that I'd been managing around, rather than actually fixing. He fixed them both in an afternoon. The generator's fuel efficiency improved by 11%. I made him the mechanical department head, which is what I called it, though department head of 2 people sounds ridiculous. He and I worked together well. He thought in systems the way I did, which meant we could troubleshoot together without talking past each other. The food distribution professional was a woman named Beth Winslow, 40 years old, who had worked in supply chain logistics for a grocery distribution center for 15 years. She spent 3 days going through every item in the food storage, cross-referencing against my catalog, and came back to me with a revised consumption plan that was more sophisticated than what I'd been running. "You've been treating this like a fixed supply," she said, "but it's not fixed if you're running supply runs. What you have here is a distribution center. You need to think about it like one." She laid out a prioritization system. High nutrition density items on the primary consumption plan, bulk items like rice and beans as secondary, and everything on a rotation by expiration schedule, so nothing went to waste through age. Under her plan, our runway extended by almost 3 months compared to my previous projection. I told her she was worth her weight in diesel fuel. She said, 2 or 3 more serious supply runs, and we can extend that further. We started planning. May. The supply runs in May were a different scale than anything I'd done in March and April. Not solo trips to nearby farms. Organized team efforts. 2 or 3 people, vehicle supported, targeting specific locations based on Beth's prioritization list, and Ryan's knowledge of the surrounding area. Ryan knew the region well. His group had been operating in it for months before they found the bunker, and he had a mental inventory of locations and what was in them. He gave this to me over several evenings in the operations room, and I built a map with Beth's prioritization overlaid on it, and we worked out a schedule. Patrick led the first team run, him, Ryan, and Ford, in the panel van that Ryan's group had brought. Target, a farming supply warehouse 8 miles northeast, which Ryan said had been untouched when he'd scouted it from a distance in February. The run took 4 hours round trip. They came back with fuel additives, extensive tool inventory, agricultural supplies including fertilizer and growing medium, and something I hadn't asked for specifically, but that Ford had grabbed on instinct, a complete seed starting kit. Growing food underground had been a theoretical item on my very long-range plan. With the seed starting kit and my existing seed supply, it became a near-term possibility. I gave the project to Beth and Claire, who spent a week designing a growing operation using the LED supplemental lights I had, the fertilizer from the supply run, and a corner of the mechanical room I sectioned off with a reflective barrier. They started with lettuce and radishes, fastest growing, lowest light requirement. Within 3 weeks, the first trays were showing green. That green, that particular color, alive and present in the underground space, did something to people that I can't fully describe. The kids would come and look at it. Eli, the 10-year-old, made it his job to check on the trays every morning and announce whether they'd grown. Dennis would stand in the doorway of the growing corner sometimes in the evenings, just looking. I found myself going there more than necessary. Something about watching something alive. The second team run, I led myself. Nora was with me. And Doug. He'd been solid since the fence line conversation. No further issues. Our target was a medical supply distributor's warehouse that Nora said she knew was in the county seat, 12 miles away. The county seat run was the most dangerous thing I'd done. A town is not like a farm. A town has buildings on both sides of streets, and buildings are cover, and the infected use cover the same way anything that moves uses it. Not intentionally, but incidentally. They congregate in shaded areas, inside structures, in spaces where sound echoes and concentrates. Walking into a town is walking into those concentrations. The warehouse was at the edge of town, in an industrial section. We came in from the south, avoided the main roads, moved through the back of a small industrial park to approach from behind. Doug was on point, moving 50 feet ahead, signaling back with hand gestures I'd established in a briefing the morning before. The warehouse was locked. I had bolt cutters, but the lock was a heavy padlock on a roll-up door, and bolt cutters on heavy-gauge steel in a quiet area make a sound that carries. I looked at the situation for 30 seconds. Then I looked at the loading dock on the building's south side. A standard loading dock, platform height, with a normal door for pedestrian access. The door had a knob lock, not a deadbolt. I shimmed it in under 2 minutes. Inside, 1,200 square feet of medical supply storage, considerably picked over but not exhausted. What was left was mostly the heavy and the obscure, large format items that were harder to grab and carry. Supplies specific enough that people in a panic didn't think to take them. IV fluid bags, still sealed. Surgical sutures in multiple sizes. A full stock of wound care supplies. Enough over-the-counter medication to stock a small pharmacy. And in the back, in a locked pharmaceutical cabinet I also shimmed, prescription medications still in sealed bottles, including antibiotics, anticonvulsants, blood pressure medication, and, unexpectedly, insulin vials. Nora, when she saw the insulin, made a sound I'd never heard from her. Not quite a word. She picked up one of the vials and turned it in her hands. "Someone in Ryan's group," she said. I hadn't known. Who? "Clara, she's type 1. She's been rationing what she had and I didn't." She stopped. How much is here?" I counted while she held the vial. 37 vials in the cabinet. "Stored right. That's months," she said. "We have a refrigerator." "We have a refrigerator," I said. She set the vial down carefully and went back to loading. She didn't say anything else about it, but the shape of her was different for the rest of the run. Lighter somehow. We were in the warehouse for 41 minutes. On the way out, Doug signaled me from the alley ahead, one finger pointing west, then the hand flat, palm down. Something to the west, stay low. I crouched, got to his position. He pointed. 40 yards west, at the intersection of the alley and the industrial park access road, 4 infected, not moving, 3 standing. 1, this was wrong, distinctly wrong, sitting against a chain-link fence post with its legs out in front of it. The posture looked so human, so ordinary, like a person who sat down and didn't get back up. We watched them for 90 seconds. None reacted to us. The one sitting against the fence post moved, not toward anything, not triggered, just a small movement, like settling deeper into the position. Its head tilted slightly. I looked at Doug. He looked at me. We backed out the other direction and went around through the parking lot on the east side. In the van on the way home, Nora asked, "What was in the alley?" 4, I said. One of them was sitting. She was quiet. That's... She stopped. I know, I said. None of us talked about it for the rest of the drive, but it sat in the van with us the whole way home. June. The problems that had been brewing since April came to a head in June, and they came from 2 directions at once. The first was internal. I want to be honest. 28 people in 1,200 square feet of underground space is too many. By June, we'd made adjustments. I'd opened the shaft passage into a secondary sleeping area, building rough sleeping platforms in the brick passage, which was uncomfortable but functional. The mechanical room had been reorganized to create more operational space. The growing corner had been moved into the shaft passage where it had more room to expand. But 28 people, even organized and intentional, produce a density of human need that wears on everyone. The friction showed up in small things, which is how it always shows up. A dispute over sleeping schedule. A noise complaint during the rest hours. 2 adults who'd been civil to each other since February, becoming pointedly uncivil in June, over something that had almost nothing to do with what they were actually angry about. The children were easier to manage than the adults. Children adapt faster, fit into routines more naturally. The adults were carrying everything they'd had taken from them, and sometimes that weight fell on whoever was closest. I was not good at managing interpersonal dynamics. I was good at systems and structures and technical problems. People problems were different, and I was aware of my own limitations here. Nora helped. She had the specific skill of medical professionals, the ability to de-escalate while remaining completely neutral, to acknowledge what someone was feeling without choosing a side. She became, without anyone deciding it or calling it by name, the group's primary mediator. Dennis helped in a different way. Less active intervention, more presence. He had a quality of steadiness that was contagious, in a slow way, like warming up in the same room as a fire. Arguments would happen, and he'd be there, and somehow the room was different with him in it. Patrick helped by giving people tasks. He understood that occupied people are calmer people. He expanded the security watch schedule, the supply inventory rotation, the maintenance checks, not because the tasks all needed doing urgently, but because doing them gave people purpose and structure. Ryan worked hard to manage his own people without making it obvious that he was managing them, which is harder than it sounds. I worked on not being isolated. That was my contribution, and I mean it as a confession rather than a virtue. My instinct in a group tension situation was to retreat into the mechanical room or the operations room and stay there until things resolved. I'd been alone for 5 months, and the group was still, in some genuine sense, uncomfortable for me. All the small frictions and needs, the noise, the smell of 28 people in a shared space, which is its own thing. But I made myself stay present. I made myself sit at the main table during meals, even when I'd rather have been in the operations room. I made myself have conversations about things that didn't matter technically, because those conversations were what made people feel like they were somewhere, not just surviving. Janet said something to me in mid-June that I've thought about since. "You know what's different about you now?" she said. "Tell me." "You were always certain," she said. "Even when you were scared, you'd be scared, and underneath, The fear was this absolute certainty that you understood the situation better than anyone else. She looked at me. That's mostly still there, but there's something else underneath it now. What? She thought about it. I don't know. I think you're not sure you were right anymore. Not about the danger. That part, yes. But about what to do about it. Being right about the danger and being right about the response aren't the same thing, I said. No, she said. They're not. The 2nd June problem came from outside. Garrett Farrow found us. Not the exact location, not on the first day, but close enough to matter. A vehicle was spotted by Patrick on the North Road. He was at the shaft top for his morning observation, and he saw a pickup truck moving slow along the county road, stopping at intervals. At one stop, a man got out, looked at the property through binoculars, got back in. Patrick came down and told me immediately. Military-style systematic search pattern, he said. Road by road, property by property. He's in the right sector. I sat with that. How long until he narrows it down? 2-3 days if he's systematic. He'll eliminate non-viable properties first. Anything too exposed, too damaged. Your property looks like a working farm property. When he runs out of obvious candidates, he'll come back here. Options, I said. 3, Patrick said. Run, take the group and move, which I don't recommend. We don't have a better location, and moving 28 people is a nightmare. 2, engage. Go to him. Try to talk, which Ryan tried before Garrett split, and it didn't work. 3, defend. Tell me how you'd defend, I said. He had been thinking about it already. This property has advantages. The main hatch is concealed. The approach to the property entrance, from the county road, is a 300-yard straight shot that we can observe from the equipment barn without being seen ourselves. He can't bring a vehicle close without us having 30 seconds to prepare. If he comes on foot, even more time. He has guns, Ryan had told us. Most of his people carry. So do we, Patrick said. I don't want to fight, I said. I know you don't. I don't want to fight, and I especially don't want to fight with children present. I know, but wanting and getting aren't the same thing. I thought for a long time. Then I said, I want to try the talk first. If Ryan's assessment of Garrett is right, not stupid, practical, motivated by resource acquisition, then there might be a negotiation available. Patrick looked skeptical. Ryan, I said, come in here. Ryan came in from the main room where he'd been within earshot. I could tell from his face he'd heard most of it. You know your brother, I said. If we go to him, meet him somewhere neutral, is there a deal he'll take? Ryan thought carefully. Garrett isn't evil, he said. He's just... A pause. He's gotten to a place where ends justify means. He's told himself that protecting his people requires anything, and he's not wrong that protection requires things. He's just drawn his circle too small. What does he want? What everyone wants. Security. Resources. A future. If we offered him integration, I said, his group, my structure, shared rules, he'd want to run it, Ryan said. He's not going to run it. I know. A pause. You'd have to convince him that joining you is better than taking from you. How? Ryan looked at me steadily. Show him the bunker. Patrick made a sound. I know, Ryan said, but Garrett's a practical man. If he sees what you have, and understands that trying to take it by force would cost him more than cooperating, he might cooperate. He's lost enough people he cared about. He doesn't lose people carelessly. I thought about it. The bunker was the secret. The bunker being the secret was what had kept me alive. Showing Garrett Farrow the bunker was showing a jackal where the pantry was. What do you have that he doesn't? I said to Ryan, as leverage. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? Something he wants from you specifically. Something that puts you in a position where he wants to work with you, rather than just take from you. I have his niece, Ryan said. I looked at him. Audrey, he said. She's his brother's daughter. My other brother died in December. Garrett, he and Audrey have a complicated relationship. She came to us when her father died. and she's been with us since. She's the one thing I know Garrett would never hurt. Audrey, the 13-year-old in the corner who never talked, watching everything. Does she know her uncle might be coming? I said. Ryan was quiet. Does she know? I said again. I've been trying to figure out how to tell her, he said. We need to tell her, I said, today, and then I need to talk to her, because whatever we decide to do, she's part of it, and she should know that. The conversation with Audrey was not what I expected. I sat with her in the shaft passage, away from the main group. She sat with her knees pulled up, looking at me with those watchful eyes. I told her as directly as I could. Garrett was her father's brother. He was in the area, looking for something. We were going to have to deal with that. She was quiet for a while after I finished. Then she said, Garrett isn't like Ryan says. I waited. Ryan thinks Garrett changed, she said. He didn't change. He was always like this. It's just, before, there were rules, laws. Before, there were things that stopped him from being like this. She was matter-of-fact about it in a way that made my chest hurt. My dad always said Garrett was a man who needed hard walls around him, or he'd just take up all the space. Are you afraid of him? I said. She thought about it seriously. Not afraid he'll hurt me. More afraid that. She stopped. He'll think I should be glad to see him. He'll think he's doing me a favor, and I should be grateful. I nodded. Audrey, here's what I need to know. Is there anything about Garrett that could help us in a negotiation? Anything he cares about beyond resources and control? She looked at the floor for a long time. He cared about my dad, she said finally. For real cared. Even when they fought, and he... A pause. He talks to my dad, or he did. When he thought nobody was listening, he'd sit somewhere and talk like my dad was there. I sat with that. Okay, I said. Thank you. I went back to Patrick and Ryan with what she'd told me. Patrick didn't know what to do with the grieving brother information. Ryan looked at it as confirmation of something he already suspected. We planned the meeting. The meeting happened on June 18th, at a crossroads 2 miles from the property. Ryan arranged it through a handheld frequency that Garrett still monitored. We came in 2 vehicles. Garrett came with 6. He was nothing like his brother. Ryan was spare and measured. Garrett was broad, loud in the physical sense even when quiet, the kind of presence that takes up more room than the person's actual dimensions justify. He looked at the property like he was assessing load-bearing capacity. He looked at me and said, "You're the bunker." "I built a bunker," I said. "How many people are you running?" "Enough," I said. He studied me. He was about 45. A face that had been good-looking and was now just strong, with eyes that moved like a military person's eyes. Full field assessment, never fixing too long on one thing. "I've heard things about your setup," he said. "From radio traffic, multiple sources. You've been running supply ops for weeks now. Organized, efficient, covered your tracks well." He paused. "Not well enough. Apparently not. You know why I'm here. I can guess." "I've got 22 people," he said, "and I'm down to maybe 6 weeks of supply. I'm not asking to join your group. I'm telling you that a confrontation is going to cost both of us more than it costs either of us to work together." I looked at him. "What do you mean by work together?" "I have fighters," he said. "My people can fight, and they will. You have supply and a facility. We come to a mutual arrangement." "What arrangement?" "I bring my people in. We contribute. We get a cut of the supply and the security." "And who makes the decisions?" I said. "We do. Together." He said it with a specific flatness that told me together meant he expected veto power. I said, "I'm going to tell you something straight, Garrett. The way I've heard you operate, by threat, I can't work with that. The people in my facility are there because we decided together. That won't change for new arrivals." He looked at me. "You think you're in a position to tell me how things work?" "I know I am," I said. "Because here's the actual math. If you try to take what I have by force, you're attacking a fortified underground structure. Your fighters can occupy my property above ground, and it will do nothing except give me reason to lock the hatch and wait you out. You've got 6 weeks of supply. I've got longer. You want to tell me which of us runs dry first?" He was quiet. The other thing, I said. Your niece is with me. The change in his face was small but complete. Audrey, I said. She's been with Ryan's group since December. She's safe and she's healthy, and she is not a bargaining chip. I need to be clear about that. I'm not offering you Audrey. I'm telling you she's there because you need to know, and because I'd rather you hear it from me than figure it out some other way. He looked away. First time his eyes had left me since we'd been talking. She with you voluntarily, he said. Yes. A long pause. Can I? When we've got an arrangement I trust, I said. Yes. He looked back at me. Something had shifted in the calculation his eyes were running. What kind of arrangement? He said. You come in. Everyone. You're 22 people. You commit to the group structure, which means decisions are made collectively, not by individual authority. Your fighters contribute to security under Patrick's structure. You personally don't run anything until the group decides to give you a role. You work your way in the same as everyone else did. That's a lot of conditions, he said. Take them or leave them, I said. He was quiet for what felt like a very long time. You're either very confident or very stupid, he said. I spent 8 years building a place to be confident from, I said. He looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at him steadily. Audrey, Garrett said. When you're in and settled, I said. Another long pause. I need to talk to my people, he said. Take the day, I said. Call this frequency by tonight. If I don't hear yes by midnight, the offer goes away. We left. Ryan drove. He didn't say anything for the first mile, and then he said, that was either very smart or very stupid. You're the second person to say that today, I said. Garrett called at 2140. Yes. 50 people in a bunker designed for 4. I need you to understand that what happened in the weeks following Garrett's group's arrival was the hardest engineering problem I'd ever faced. And I say this as someone who has designed bridges. The structural challenge of bridge design is real, but it has decades of codified practice behind it. The structural challenge of integrating 22 mistrustful, resource-stressed people into a community that already had tensions of its own, inside a sealed underground space, with no external help and limited resources, that has no code book. The first week was controlled chaos. I'll say controlled, because nobody died, and nobody got seriously hurt, and the structure held. But chaos, because every system I designed for one person was now running at 20 to 50 times its intended load. Water. The well and filtration system could support up to 30 people at my consumption estimates. 50 people required a rationing protocol. I dropped everyone, including myself, to 0.6 of a gallon per day for drinking and cooking. Hygiene water every other day, communal sponge bath schedule, no exceptions. This was harsh and nobody liked it, and I explained the math and the math was what it was. Food. Beth's revised system was extended again, now with input from a woman in Garrett's group named Kathleen, who had worked in institutional food service. She and Beth went through the remaining inventory and built what they called the minimum viable menu, a daily nutrition plan at the absolute floor of caloric and nutritional sufficiency. Using what we had, it was enough. Not comfortable, but enough. Sleeping. We were sleeping in shifts, not 8 on, 8 off, but a staggered system where at any given time a third of the group was in rest-designated areas with noise suppression rules. This meant the space never had all 50 people awake and active simultaneously, which would have been unmanageable. Garrett's people were mostly as promised. His fighters, 7 adults with varying military or law enforcement backgrounds, slotted into Patrick's security structure. Patrick was good at this. He didn't challenge Garrett's people or try to establish dominance. He just organized, explained the system, and gave people responsibility within it. Responsibility is equalizing. Garrett himself was harder. He did what he'd said. He deferred to the group structure. Didn't grab authority. Let others make decisions. But his presence was heavy in the space. He was the kind of person who occupies more social gravity than one person should. And the people around him orbited accordingly. I watched other people watch him before they spoke, gauging his reaction, which told me the dynamic was still operating even without formal authority. His reunion with Audrey happened on day 3 after his group arrived. I didn't arrange it or stage it. I just made sure they were both in the main room at the same time, and then stepped out. I don't know exactly what they said. Audrey told me later. Briefly. He cried. She'd never seen him cry before. He said her father's name and then couldn't finish the sentence, and she finished it for him. She said it was strange. She said it was almost enough. Whatever happened between them, Garrett was different after. Not transformed. Not some movie redemption arc different. Just less large. Like something that had been pressing outward in him had found a place to go. He came to me the next day and said, without ceremony, "Tell me what you need from my people." I told him. He said okay and walked away and did it. July. The horde came in July. I'd been expecting something like it since May. The radio traffic had been building toward it. Descriptions from other survivor frequencies of large mass movements in the eastern part of the state. The infected don't organize, but they aggregate. Enough noise in one direction or a mass trigger event, something that startles a large group simultaneously, and they move together the way water moves, filling the direction of least resistance. A large enough aggregation becomes a wave. We heard it before we saw it. The intake pipes, on July 7th, began carrying a sound that built over 4 hours from intermittent to continuous, to a specific grinding presence that came through the concrete itself, not just the air pipes. I got Patrick at 0300. "It's here," I said. He was already awake. "How large?" "The sound is large." We went up the shaft together. Through the floorboard gaps I could see the property in the light of a 3/4 moon, and what I saw, I sat with it for a long time before I could process it. The property was covered. Not entirely, not solid, but the fields to the north and east were moving. In the moonlight, the movement looked like water, which is wrong, but is the only way I can describe it. The field was moving in a slow, broad, uneven way that resolved, when I forced my eyes to focus on individual elements, into figures, walking, in every direction, walking the same direction, which was roughly southwest, through and past and over our property. The bunker's position was in the southwest quadrant of the property. They were moving past us, not toward us. No sound we were making was drawing them. The ventilation was passive at that hour. The generator was off. The lights were LED and sealed. 50 people underground, and the only sound we were producing that could travel was the faint vibration of 50 heartbeats and the footsteps of Patrick and me at the top of the shaft, which were on packed dirt and essentially nothing. We watched for an hour. They were passing, moving past and beyond. A river of them, and the bunker was a rock they were flowing around. But in the middle of that hour, something happened. One of them stopped. I don't mean one of them stopped near the outbuilding in response to a sound. I mean one of them stopped in the open field, 40 yards from the outbuilding, when nothing had triggered it. It stopped and turned again, and then it was facing the outbuilding. Not walking toward it, just facing it. Patrick's hand closed on my arm. The figure stood facing the outbuilding for 3 full minutes. The rest of the mass moved past it. It didn't move. Then it turned back to the southwest and walked. Patrick and I looked at each other in the dark above the shaft. "What was that?" he said. "I don't know," I said. "I genuinely don't know." We stayed at the observation point until 0600, when the light was full and the sound through the intake pipes was dropping. By sunrise, the mass had passed. The fields were churned, torn up in the way a large group of animals churns soil. But the damage was to the field grass. Nothing structural, nothing that mattered to the bunker. I took a full surface inspection that morning. Patrick was with me. What we found outside the outbuilding, a handprint in the soft earth by the base of the wall. One handprint, pressed in clearly, about 4 feet off the south corner of the building, in the mud by the foundation. Not a footprint, a handprint. Someone had braced against the outside of the outbuilding. The handprint was the size of a normal adult hand. I measured it against my own. Similar proportions. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. We went back inside. The second half of July was quieter. In the aftermath of the horde, The surrounding area was depleted. Large movements tend to sweep infected out of a region, at least temporarily, as the aggregation draws from the surrounding population and moves it elsewhere. Patrick's surface observation in the weeks after reported much lower activity than we'd seen in June. Some days, nothing visible at all. We used that window. The supply run program accelerated. We were running operations almost daily. Small teams, specific targets, efficient. Beth's inventory grew. The growing operation, tended by Claire and 3 of Garrett's people who'd had agricultural experience, was producing enough lettuce and radishes that we could supplement the canned ration with something fresh. A specific moment in late July. I was eating lunch, canned beans over rice, the standard midday ration, and Helen passed me a small bowl with 4 radish slices and 2 leaves of lettuce she'd pulled that morning from the growing trays. Fresh, still cool from the growing area's temperature. I ate the radishes and lettuce before I touched the beans and rice. The flavor was nothing special in any absolute sense, just fresh food. But underground, in month 9, it was so specifically not the taste of canned or dried food that my entire sensory system oriented toward it. I sat there with 4 radish slices and felt something I can only call gratitude, directed at no one in particular, about nothing specific, just at the fact that something could still grow. I don't know, maybe that sounds crazy, but I'm writing it down because it's true. August brought the second crisis, and it was one I hadn't built a system for. There was sickness. Not infection, not zombie bite infection, which was always the first fear whenever anyone showed any symptom, and which I'd been very clear about the biological mechanism of, so people didn't panic over every fever. A respiratory illness, ordinary, the kind that circulates through any closed population in close quarters. 5 people sick within 3 days of each other, low fever, congestion, fatigue. In a normal world, annoying but trivial. Underground, in a space with limited sickbay, limited ventilation variation, 50 people in close proximity. It was a problem to manage carefully. Nora took charge. She identified the sick, moved them to the shaft passage, which had slightly better air circulation from the passive intake, established a separate water and food distribution for the sick area, and implemented a basic isolation protocol. She was efficient and direct, and the 5 sick people were visibly calmer for having her in charge of them. I spent a lot of time in August watching Nora and thinking about how different people are under pressure. Not better or worse, different. Some people become smaller, contract, get quieter. Some people become sharper, more focused. Some people are exactly who they are in regular life, but larger, the way a lens magnifies what's already there. Nora was the sharply focused type. Janet was the magnified type. She was always practical, and underground she was practical in a way that took up more space. Patrick was the contractive type, but in a productive way. He got very still, very efficient. No wasted motion. Me? I don't know what I am. I think I get mechanical. Problems become engineering problems and I solve them. The emotional content gets deferred to the evening verbal log, and sometimes it defers until the verbal log is just me sitting quietly in the dark, counting ceiling rivets. That's not necessarily healthy, but it's kept everyone alive so far. The respiratory illness resolved in 10 days. Nobody got worse than miserable. On the day the last person came out of the shaft passage sickbay and back into the main population, Dennis led something that wasn't quite a prayer and wasn't quite not one. He just said, "To the room." We held. And people kind of exhaled. 50 people exhaling simultaneously is its own specific sound. The crisis I'm not telling you about is the one I'm scared to write. Okay, I'll write it. In mid-August, I found evidence that someone in the bunker had been going out. Not on an authorized supply run. We had a full log system for those. Sign out and return. Routes recorded. Evidence that someone had been going out through the shaft, without logging, at night. The evidence was in the shaft itself, a scrape pattern on the lower brick that was consistent with someone exiting regularly, with the soft soil prints at the base of the shaft that didn't match any footwear profile in our authorized team. Someone smaller. Someone whose tread I recognized from the shaft passage floor. I sat with this for 2 days before I talked to anyone. Then I went to Dennis. I'm not sure why Dennis. Partly because he was the most neutral person in the group, without alignment to any specific sub-faction. Partly because of something he'd said early on, about how he'd found Audrey already in the church when he arrived. She was there before you, I said. He was quiet. She was in the church, I said, before you got there and put out the radio call. How did she get in? The back window, he said carefully. She'd opened it, came in. Coming from where? He looked at me. I don't know, Owen. Did you ask? She said she'd been moving around, looking for somewhere. Moving around, I said. On her own. A 13-year-old girl. On her own. In the middle of an outbreak. Yes. I sat with that. Is she okay? In the sense of safe outside. I think, he stopped. I think she's been outside more than we know, and has learned things we don't know she's learned. And I think she's been surviving in ways we'd find disturbing. Is she at risk? To herself? No. I genuinely believe no. He looked at me carefully. But I think you should talk to her. I did. Audrey didn't deny it. She looked at me with those calm, watchful eyes and said, yes, she'd been going out at night. Had been going out since before the bunker. She'd been out on her own for 2 weeks after her father died before she found the church. She'd been going out from the bunker at night to... She stopped. To what? I said. To check something, she said. What something? Long pause. She looked at her hands. The one that stops, she said. Near the building. I wanted to know if it stops every time, or just that once. The figure in the moonlight, the handprint by the outbuilding wall. Audrey, I said carefully. I think it's my dad, she said. And there it was. I looked at her. I thought about how to respond to that. I thought about all the things I knew about the pathogen, which was not much, which was essentially nothing with any scientific rigor. I thought about a man who had died in December, and what was left of him now, if anything was left. I thought about a 13-year-old girl who had lost her father and her world in the same month. Have you gotten close to it? I said. No. I watch from the tree line. It comes to the outbuilding and stops, and then it goes. It doesn't do anything else. How many times? 7, she said. 7 nights. This figure had returned to the same spot on the property. Not the main hatch, not the barn. The outbuilding, above the shaft where Audrey slept. I sat there a long time. Audrey, I said finally. I'm not going to tell you what to believe about what that is. I don't know. But I need you to stop going out alone at night. Not because it's wrong. Because if something happened to you on one of those nights, there'd be no way to. I stopped. We need you here. In here. Okay? She looked at me for a long time. Okay, she said. And I'm going to watch for it, I said. The next time it comes, I'll watch with you, okay? She nodded. I went back to the operations room and sat there for a long time. Some questions don't have answers. That's not a comfortable thing for an engineer. But it might be the most honest thing I've written in this journal. September. What I can tell you about September is that 50 people living together underground for months had become something that I can only call, carefully, a community. Not a happy community, not a perfect one. Still tensions, still friction. Still days where someone lost their patience with the rationing, or the schedule, or another person's habits in the shared space. But something had cohered, the way concrete coheres. Not a single element, but a composite. And the composite was stronger than the parts. The growing operation was now producing more than supplemental amounts. Not enough to replace the canned ration, not yet. But enough that the twice-weekly fresh food had become something people looked forward to, talked about, participated in caring for. Garrett's 2 agricultural people were running it with Claire now, and they had plans on paper for expanding into the shaft passage, a full-length growing corridor if we could get the lighting right. Ford and I had resolved the generator fuel problem as fully as it could be resolved. The operation was running on approximately 80% solar and battery power, with the generator as genuine backup rather than regular supplement. The degraded battery cell had been replaced. Terry had engineered an additional small solar panel linkage from salvage components, adding about 15% to our charging capacity. We weren't comfortable, but we were stable. Patrick had the security operation running in a way that I'd honestly never have thought of on my own. A 2-person surface rotation, 8 hours on, using the barn structure and a secondary observation point he'd built on the north fence line, with a hand signal communication system between them and a specific set of warning protocols for the bunker below. Nothing moved across this property now without us knowing within 90 seconds. The signal came through on September 14th. I was doing my evening radio scan when I caught something on the shortwave that I'd last heard in December. A government frequency, organized transmission, not a loop or a fragment. A scheduled broadcast, with a time signature and a broadcast identifier. This is the United States Federal Emergency Management Agency. Continuity Operations Broadcast, September 14th. All persons receiving this transmission. Consolidated zones are operational and expanding. Secure transportation corridors are being established between zone locations. If you are outside a secure zone, this broadcast contains static. Then it came back. Coordinates for nearest consolidation point. Your sector code is static. The sector code came through broken, but I got enough of it to place us in a general region. The broadcast gave a distance estimate and a direction, and then, clearly, a date. First ground convoy will reach sector marker 9 Alpha on October 3rd. First ground convoy will reach sector marker 9 Alpha on October 3rd. I wrote everything down, then I sat with it. October 3rd was 19 days away. I called everyone into the main room. It took a few minutes for 50 people to assemble in the main space and the overflow areas. When they were all present, some sitting, some standing, kids on laps, Nora and Patrick near the front, Garrett against the far wall with his arms folded, Janet sitting at the main table. I told them what I'd heard. The silence was total. Then Eli, the 10-year-old, said, "Does that mean we can go outside?" Nobody answered him directly, but people were looking at each other, and the look was asking the question that his words had out loud. I sat on the edge of the main table. "Here's what I know," I said. "A convoy is coming. I don't know what that means, not exactly. I don't know the size, the capacity, the intent. I don't know what the consolidated zones look like or how they work. I don't know if this broadcast is exactly what it says or something else entirely." "Could be a trap," Patrick said, not pessimistically, just naming it. "It could be," I said. "I don't think it is, based on the technical character of the broadcast. It's got the right identifiers for FEMA continuity ops, and those identifiers are hard to fake without the source material. But I can't be certain." "What do you want to do?" Nora said. I looked at the room. I looked at Eli and Bex and the other kids. I looked at Clara, who was alive because of the insulin in the medical supply warehouse. I looked at Dennis and Claire and Helen and all the people who had found this place, and made it something different from what I'd built it for. "I want to go check it out first," I said. "Before October 3rd. Patrick and I, maybe Ryan. Find the sector marker, see what's there, assess whether it's what the broadcast says, and then come back and tell you what we found. And if it's real," Beth said. "Then we decide together what to do," I said. "All of us, together." The room was quiet again. Then Garrett said from the wall, "What are you hoping it is?" I looked at him. He was watching me with that full field assessment gaze of his, but something in it was different than when we'd met at the crossroads. Less calculating, more, I don't know, just asking. "Honestly," I said. "Yeah, I thought about it. I'm hoping it's the beginning of something. Not perfect, not easy, just the beginning of the next thing." He looked at me for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Then go find out." October 1st. I went out. Patrick was with me. Ryan was with me. We took the truck, the one that had driven everyone to the property, and had been running supply runs for months, and now had nearly 40,000 miles on an odometer that once started at 12,000. 3 people in a tank of diesel and a shortwave receiver mounted under the dash, so I could track the broadcast frequencies as we got closer to the sector marker coordinates. The drive was 3 hours, which in the pre-outbreak world would have been 45 minutes. Roads were not what they had been. We went around several sections entirely, detoured through fields twice, crossed a bridge that I inspected on foot before trusting with the truck. The county I'd been in, the flat Indiana farmland I'd been underground beneath for almost a year, gave way eventually to the edge of a larger population center, and that transition was visible in the density of damage on the roadside, the frequency of stalled vehicles, the burned sections of suburban neighborhood that we went around on unfamiliar back roads. I saw the dead from the truck, several times, not many. The area had been through something, had been swept, but a few, in fields and roadside ditches, and once sitting in a lawn chair in front of a house that was otherwise intact, as if someone had decided to sit outside and then stopped mid-decision. We didn't stop. We moved. The sector marker coordinate put us at the edge of a state park about 2 hours north of my property. We stopped at the park entrance and sat for 5 minutes, listening. From the park, from about a mile inside the tree line, engine sounds. Multiple, and something else, voices. Actual human voices, carrying through quiet air. Patrick looked at me. That's either exactly what it says it is, or it's an ambush. Only one way to know, I said. We drove in slow. It was real. The convoy was 3 military trucks and 2 civilian vehicles that had been modified with armor plating, and it was operated by a mix of military personnel and civilians in some kind of organized capacity. There were maybe 40 people at the staging area they'd set up in the park's main picnic ground, with a radio mast set up and a generator running and folding tables with maps and communications equipment. The person who came to meet us was a woman in her 30s, in a combination of military clothing and civilian gear, carrying a clipboard, who introduced herself as Operations Coordinator Bishop. She had the specific, exhausted, competent look of someone who had been doing this for a long time and expected to keep doing it. She asked our numbers. She asked our location. She asked about our supply and medical situation. She answered my questions about the Consolidated Zone, a facility in central Illinois, a repurposed National Guard installation and surrounding township, currently holding about 1,200 people, with medical facilities, agricultural operations, and a communications hub that was slowly rebuilding connection with other zones across the country. 1,200 people, alive, organized, building something. She asked if we wanted extraction. I said I needed 24 hours. She said they'd be here until the 3rd. I drove back with Patrick and Ryan in a silence that lasted for most of the first hour, and then dissolved into something that was half planning and half not celebration exactly. Something quieter than celebration. Relief that had been a long time coming and didn't quite know what to do with itself. You're going to say yes, Ryan said. Same thing Doug had said, months ago, when I'd decided to send the radio call back to Nora. I don't know yet, I said. I need to hear what they think. Owen. I looked at him. You built a place to survive in, he said. That's done. It worked. Now someone's offering you a place to live in. I drove. They're different things, he said. I know they are, I said. The truck's headlights cut through the dark, and on both sides, the flat Indiana fields were silver in the moonlight, empty and still. And somewhere behind us, a year of underground, and a year before that, and 8 years before that, and a marriage, and a brother, and a friendship that hadn't survived October, and all the rest of it was laid out like a road that I'd already traveled and couldn't travel again. Yeah, I said. I know they're different things. October 2nd. I told them everything. Stood in the main room, all 50 of them assembled, and told them exactly what we'd found, and what it meant, and what the options were. Option 1, stay. The bunker could keep running. We had the supply run operation, the growing corridor, the security system. We were stable. It would be hard, and it would be uncertain, and we might be stable for another year, or might not, but it was the known thing. Option 2, go. Take what we could carry in the vehicles, leave what we couldn't, and meet the convoy at the sector marker. Accept extraction to the Consolidated Zone in central Illinois. Option 3, and I said this quietly, because it was the one I'd spent the most time thinking about, was a combination. The bunker wasn't going anywhere. It would be here if things went wrong at the zone. Some people stay, some go, or everyone goes, but we document the location and come back. I said, "This is your choice, all of yours. I'm not going to make this call for the group." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of 50 people working through fear and hope and exhaustion and grief and practical concern, and all the complicated threads of what it meant to be alive at the end of everything, and now be asked to step back into something that might be a world. Helen said she wanted her children to have a future that wasn't underground. Ray agreed. Dennis said he'd go where the people went. Nora said the medical resources at a 1,200-person facility would save lives that couldn't be saved here. Ford said the mechanic situation at a guard installation would be infinitely better than what he'd been working with. Beth said she'd been running toward consolidation scenarios in her head for 6 months, and this was the one she'd hoped for. Patrick said he'd go where I went. Janet said nothing for a long time, and then she said, "Owen built this to keep people alive until there was somewhere to go. There's somewhere to go." Garrett said, and this was the thing I most hadn't expected, "What happens to this place if we leave?" I looked at him. "I'm not arguing against going," he said. "I'm asking what happens to it." "It stays," I said. "Locked, stocked, with what we can't carry, documented with the zone coordinators, so if someone needs it, they know it's here." He nodded slowly. "And if things go wrong at the zone, if it doesn't work out, we come back," I said. "Or someone does." He looked around the bunker, the shelving, the systems, the growing corridor that you could see the edge of through the passage door, the pull-up bar in the mechanical room doorway that people had been using for months. He looked at it like a man who understood what it had taken to build it and what it had meant. "Okay," he said. "I vote yes." One by one, everyone voted. 50 for yes. October 3rd. We left at dawn. I was the last one out of the hatch. I stood at the bottom of the ramp, in the space I'd been building for 8 years and living in for a year. And I looked at it one more time. The LEDs were on their dawn setting, the low, warm-toned morning cycle I'd programmed in month 1 to give the space something like morning light. The food shelving was reduced but not empty. We'd taken what we could carry, left the rest. The growing corridor still had its lights on and its trays of green, because we couldn't carry trays of lettuce in truck beds, and because something alive in there felt right. The analog clock on the wall was ticking. I turned off the generator, left the solar running so the basic systems would continue, bolted the inner door with all 4 bolts, went up the ramp. The hatch made its specific sound when I closed it from outside, the thunk of steel, and then the settling of the lever bar falling into the locked position. The morning was clear, cold October, exactly like the morning I'd come down into the hatch a year ago. The sky the same blue-gray that Indiana skies are in fall mornings, with that particular quality of light that comes from low sun angle and humidity. I stood and breathed it for a moment. The smell of soil and cold air, and something I now knew from months of absence, was the smell of the living world. Every kind of organism doing what living organisms do, layered on top of each other, complex and immediate, and nothing at all like filtered air. Nora was waiting by the trucks. Patrick was doing a final check on the vehicles. Audrey was standing by the north fence, looking toward the tree line. I walked over to her. She was looking at the line of trees, at nothing specific, in the way she sometimes did. "You ready?" I said. She didn't answer for a second. Then, "Do you think he knows we're leaving?" I looked at the tree line. The trees were still, just trees. "I don't know," I said honestly. She nodded, looked for another moment. Then she turned away from the trees and walked toward the truck. I stayed a second longer, looking at the tree line. Nothing moved. I walked to the truck. The convoy was 5 miles ahead, waiting. 1,200 people in central Illinois were waiting without knowing we existed. Whatever came next, the zone, the work, the rebuilding, all the hard things that come after surviving, was waiting. I got in the truck, started the engine. In the side mirror, the property got smaller as we drove. The barn roof, the fence lines, the flat field, then just the tree line, then just road. I kept driving. Somewhere in northern Indiana, October 3rd, late afternoon. One more thing. I'm writing this in the truck while Patrick drives and Ryan navigates, and everyone else is in the convoy ahead, or behind, or alongside. And I'm trying to get this down while it's still clear. I've been going over the math in my head. The whole thing. 8 years of building, 1 year of living in it. 50 people found or kept alive by it. The systems that held. The ones that almost didn't. The handprint by the outbuilding. The figure in the moonlight that I don't have a name for. The insulin vials and the radish slices. And the pull-up bar. And Phil's last transmission at the 6-hour mark. Here's the thing about being an engineer. You build something to spec. You calculate loads and tolerances and failure points. And you design to handle what you think the load will be. And then reality applies itself. And the load is never exactly what you calculated. And the failures are never exactly the ones you anticipated, and the structure either holds or it doesn't. The structure held, not the way I planned it. Better, in some ways, which is not something I ever expected to say. It held more than one person. It held people I didn't build it for, and hadn't planned for, and couldn't have planned for. It held grief, and trust, and conflict, and something that was almost hope on the good days. And it held all of that under 12 inches of concrete and 4 feet of Indiana earth, and nothing got in that shouldn't have. I spent 8 years believing I was right, and feeling insane about it. Now I'm on my way to a place I've never seen, with 50 people I hadn't met a year ago, towards something I can't fully predict. I built a thing to survive in. Now I'm going somewhere to live in. Those are different things. I know they're different things. The road ahead is clear. Early October light on Indiana fields, gold at the edges and brown in the middle, the particular harvest month color that I've seen every year of my life, and will now probably see again. Ryan just said the convoy markers are 4 miles. Patrick is doing what Patrick does, which is driving without a lot of unnecessary talk, watching everything on both sides of the road with that even attention of his. Audrey is asleep in the back seat. She fell asleep about an hour ago, with her head against the window, and her face when she sleeps is completely young, which is something you can forget about a 13-year-old who's had to know too many things. Janet is in the vehicle ahead. I can see the back of her head. The clock I had in the bunker is in a box in the truck bed. I packed it at the last minute. An analog clock with a loud tick, and I'm not sure why I took it, except that the sound of a clock in the silence was the thing that proved time was moving. And I'm not ready to not have that. I don't know what the zone looks like. I don't know what the work looks like. I don't know what next year looks like or the year after. But the engine is running, and the road is clear, and the light is good enough to see by. That's enough for now. That's what enough looks like.